You're listening to the best of the bravest. Interviews with the FDNY's elite.
We're not that far away from volume 50 of this miniseries. It started a couple years ago with Ray Seeley from Squad 270, and it's really taken on a life of its own because I kid you not, I was talking to my producer a couple years ago, and I was doing a lot of, NYPD interviews, and I've continued to do those interviews, and I enjoy them immensely. But I said to my brother-in-law, I says, who's also my producer, as you've heard me say before, why am I not talking to firemen? I should be talking to New York City firemen who can tell just as many interesting stories. Thus, I got Ray, and then the ball started rolling from there. And here we are now at volume 44. And on that note, I welcome you back to not only the best of the bravest, but of course, the Mike the New Haven podcast as a whole. This is episode 272. And if you haven't checked out episode 271, Ernie Anastas was the guest, man of the hour, 40 years on New York City television across a multitude of stations. And that was truly one of the better conversations I felt I was fortunate to have. He was an excellent guest, and that was an amazing episode. Thanks in large part to him and his excellent contribution as a guest to the show. So before we get to my next guest, who's equally interesting and had a great career in the fire service and is still active in the fire service as an instructor, we have one ad to take care of tonight, and that is my man, Billy Ryan.
The Mike the New Haven podcast is proudly sponsored and supported by the Ryan Investigative Group. If you need an elite PI, look no further than the elite Ryan Investigative Group, which is run by retired NYPD detective Bill Ryan, a 20-year veteran of the department who served the majority of his career in the Detective Bureau, most notably in the Arson and Explosion Squad. So if you need a PI to handle anything from fraud, legal services, and anything else that you might require, contact Bill at 347-417-1610. Again, 347-417-1610. Reach him at his website or the email that you see here. Again, if you need a PI, look no further than Bill Ryan and the Ryan Investigative Group, a proud supporter and sponsor of the Mike the New Haven podcast.
Let me tell you, I'm not just saying this about Bill because he's my friend. He's not one of those PIs that sits up at the desk all day with his feet up. He's out. Every time I talk to him, he's out in the field. He's still working as if he was an NYPD detective. So if you need a PI, I'm not kidding. He's the guy you want to go to. Hi to Joe Maliga in the chat and Darren Phillips as well, and everybody else tuning in tonight. All right, my next guest has been in the fire service as both an active member, like I said, and in retirement as an instructor, starting his career in our mutual home state of Connecticut, specifically in the town of Newington and later New Britain, before a 1990 departure would see him go to the FDNY, where he spent 31 years. His career in the fire service spans about, as an active member at least, 43 years. He called it a career from the FDNY in 2021, but he's continuing on, like I said, which we'll discuss tonight, and that for this volume 44, the Reggie Jackson number of the best of the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite, is retired FDNY Lieutenant Tim Klett. Tim, welcome. How are you?
Good. How are you? 44 is half of 88.
And there you go. And you were at Engine 88 for the bulk of your career.
There you go. Yeah.
Just tonight. I love it. Little coincidence there. So like we were talking about off the air, similar backgrounds for both of us. I'm a New Haven guy. You're a Newington guy. Tell me about growing up in CT.
It was a nice little town. I enjoyed it. It was a small town back then. Not small, but it's definitely grown since I left. But it wasn't a bad place. The same neighborhood everybody had in any town, America. A bunch of kids and summertime, going out your bikes at 8 o'clock in the morning, not coming back till it was dark, and try to find a place to play ball, and one team against the other, one neighborhood against the other. It was like any neighborhood. It was nice. It was safe, and it was tight. I enjoyed it. It was tough leaving, but bigger things awaited.
Oh, of course, as we'll discuss tonight. Was there any family on the job for you, or were you the first in your family to get on the job?
Well, so I come from a family of cops for the most part. My father was a sergeant in the Newington Police Department. My uncle ended up being a chief of the Newington Police Department. My brother was the chief of Berlin Police Department. Both my sisters married cops. My uncle's son right now is the chief of Rocky Hill PD. My mother's brother ran the FBI's bomb division.
Wow.
So, but when I was young, my father and his three brothers all were volunteers in Newington. So the firehouse was right down the street from where I grew up. And, my father would go down there, and I spent a lot of time down at that firehouse as a kid growing up. But, I really knew the day I popped out of my mother. I mean, I don't ever remember wanting to do something else, ever. Even, as a small kid playing with this molded plastic fire truck at my grandmother's house at a very young age. I'd always run and be the first one in the house so I could get that toy to play with. So it just, I think, going to the firehouse with my dad kind of intensified that. And then it was just, as soon as I could get on, I got on. It was simple as that.
Of course.
Basically a cop family. Thanksgiving was really fun in my house. It was 20 cops against one fireman. And I always used to tell them, well, that's kind of an even score, right? 20 against 20 cops, one fireman. We're good. I think I can handle it.
No, it's funny because you'll see a lot of cops, and they've told me this themselves. Not all of them, but most of them want to enjoy the best of both worlds. And you'll see, particularly if they live out on Long Island, a lot of my emergency service unit friends are also, when they're not in an ESU truck, volunteer firemen. So it's interesting. And I have a colleague of mine. Go ahead.
And the PD is such, especially these days, it's such a thankless job. It really is. And I tell everybody, I told my brother all the time, I wouldn't want your job for all the money in the universe. It's just, it's not a good, it's a great job, but it's not,
it's not a good time.
They've tried to make it into something, people have no respect for them anymore. It's terrible. It's a very, very thankless job. You got to be a special person to be able to do that job and then retire from it after 30 years,
Oh yeah, you're not kidding, and it breaks your heart, but they're still out there doing the best they can under some really tough circumstances.
Yeah.
So getting out as a cadet originally, this is back then when the cadet programs, and there's still some in existence, but were particularly present not only in Connecticut but across the country. Tell me about getting started as a cadet. What it took? Was it a hard process, an easy one? Tell me about it.
So the kind of funny, Newington didn't have a cadet program. But like a lot of places, they were just starting. They weren't like it is today, where they can't get, they can't get people to join the volunteers. But they were just starting there. I mean, there was a waiting list to get into the Newington Fire Department. And being as a cadet, it gave you it was like not a back door, but it gave you a leg up on just somebody coming off the street that if you went through their cadet program. So actually, me and like 4 of the guys were the very first cadet program. For the Newington Fire Department. Paul Walsh was one of them, who ended up going on to be a chief in New Britain, Connecticut. So it really wasn't that hard. We had to go through some training. We couldn't really ride the trucks, but we could train. And they gave us some old gear. So I did that for about 2 years. And there was a lieutenant. He was actually a cop in Rocky Hill, but there was a lieutenant that ran the whole thing. This guy Frank Danny. He ran that first cadet program. And now now in Newington they have their own firehouse. They have their own rig. They don't go to fires, but they train a lot, and they have a large group of people that are in that cadet program. So we were the first ones. A lot of people were afraid of the cadet program because they didn't want 18-year-olds on the fire department. They just thought it was, you had to be older and more responsible. And but we went through the cadet program, and the day I turned 18, I could put my application in, and 2 months later I got sworn in as an active member.
There you go. Talking with Tim Klett, Volume 44, Best of Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. Wanted to shout out to a few more people coming into the live chat. Maui Swift, a.k.a. Nicole Wirch, tuning in via Vancouver, Canada, as is my man, Darren Phillips, who I mentioned earlier. Firefighter 69, who says, the Wizard of Water. And this guy is a legend, he also added. And another remark that was said on Getting Salty, but we can't say here. Klett is the first part of it, and then the name of a car.
Yeah. Yeah, we used to make fun. We used to make fun of a car I drove. That's all.
Yes. The bro of H2O says QC Beast, who's always tuning in, and Matt Shirley, of course. And like we talked about earlier, he's another double dipper. He's a school resource officer and also a volunteer fireman. He mentioned. So
God bless those guys.
Yeah,
a school resource officer, it can't be any fun at all.
No, not these days. And Matt, by the way, I left a voicemail for your chief. I did call him, just so you know. Hopefully we can get him on the show soon. So around this time, and you make a good point, because I was talking about it with a friend of mine who's a retired lieutenant out of the department I work for in West Haven, where you're right, it's down not just in Connecticut, but across the board right now. It's hard to get volunteers because of the commitment. But back then, and this is no knock on those, that still in this generation want to commit to it, but I feel on a grander scale back then, you had people who were firmly about it and made the sacrifices, were willing to make the sacrifices to be a part of it.
I think that's definitely part of it too. But I think that it's funny. I was just down at the Fort Lauderdale Fire Expo, and we had this question about recruitment, and I wish I had the answer, but I do believe that the commitment, the training, the mandatory training to be a volunteer is a little bit excessive. I know they mandated back then. There was when I first got on the cadets, there was no formal firefighter one. You know, we had Kylie's classes, and that was a chief in Noyton, Mickey Kiley. He was actually pretty well known in that Hartford area, Mickey Kiley, and we had Mickey Kiley's classes. And if you took Kiley's classes, you were interior qualified. And now there's firefighter 1, firefighter 2. You got all this mandated training, and I think that's part of it. And I think that, you know, economically, you know, people have to work 2 jobs to put food on the table in some cases, and then to give up another, you know, 30, 40 hours a week for the volunteer fire department. It's just hard to do. So I think there's a lot of reasons fire departments are struggling to get people. I don't think you can just point it at one thing. Even paid fire departments are struggling to get people to come. I mean, not the New York City Fire Department and not bigger, but there's a lot of paid fire departments that are begging for people.
Oh yeah,
you know, just begging for people. So
Yeah.
I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, and it's not a one size fits all solution. You know, our department in West Haven, we just hired 8 new recruits, which will hopefully, if they all pass, and so far so good, they're due to graduate, I believe, in December. It would groundswell us from 56 members currently to 64. So
Where's that? West Haven?
West Haven. So you're starting to see some, and that's just one district because we're 3 different districts. You're starting to see it beef up a little bit. But yeah, you're right. It is a commitment because back then, I mean, academies were maybe 5-6 weeks long. Academy now in our state's 4 months.
Yeah, no, we didn't even have an academy. We had Kylie's classes, and then we had to do a day of burn in the Bloomfield fire tower. You know, Bloomfield fire. Yep. You know, the one at the airport didn't even exist. So we had Wolcott outside of Waterbury, and it was the one in Bloomfield, and there was a guy, Frank Beebe, that was an instructor up there. You're gonna laugh. You know, they would light diesel pit fires in the basement, and they would send you down there without a mask on.
Wow.
You know, and he'd be sitting there downstairs smoking a cigarette, and you'd be down there with no mask on and with diesel burning in the basement of that place. That's, you know, that's 40 years ago. You know, they've stopped that kind of training, but that's, you know, if you could go down and hang out in the cellar, you were good. You were an interior qualified fireman.
Oh my goodness.
Pretty crazy stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. As far as non-training scenarios like that one, during your time in Newington, do you recall your first fire?
Yeah. Listen, I have this uncanny memory about fires, and people they say there's no way, but I to be honest with you, I could probably say without any hesitation that I remember just about every fire I've ever been to. You know, I have this stupid uncanny. I remember my first run in the volunteers. It was snowing out because I got in December, and it was a brush fire. And I was just trying to stay busy around my father's house. I was still living with my dad. And I heard him go off, and I didn't want to act like I was excited that it was going to be my first run. And my father comes out. He goes, you know, engine 2's got to run for a brush fire. And I said, yeah, I heard it. I'm just going to finish up, and then and I was busting the seams to get my car and go and you know, go to this brush fire. It turned out to be nothing, but that was my first run. My first real fire. And Newington was at the time, it was the largest all volunteer department in the state. And we were actually, for a volunteer place, we were quite busy. We were running 6 engines, 2 trucks, and a rescue in Newington. And the first real fire I had was a guy had a place that he raised canaries in. It was just basically an oversized garage, and he was raising canaries to sell to pet shops. And early in the morning, it was wintertime, so he had a heater in the place, and the heater got the place going. And the joke was the only canary we saved was the one that was on the weather vane, you know.
Oh.
But,
Poor things.
yeah, that's the very first fire as a real fireman I went to was that one.
Wow.
You know,
Yeah.
we had a serial arsonist running around the town from like 80, 84, 85-ish, 85, 86 years running around. And we were one night we were going to a fire and we came over this hill on Route 5. I don't know if you're familiar with Newington, where the Berlin Turnpike is. Yeah. It comes up by the where the old Grantmore is, and you come back down a hill, coming where the state motor vehicle is now. And there was a big column of smoke, and Paul Walsh says, wow, that place is roaring. I go, no, it's just smoke. He goes, well, that one's roaring. And there were 2 fires.
Wow. The same
about
time.
a block away from each other. Yeah.
My goodness. Yeah, no, definitely. And so sometimes people look at smaller towns and they think, oh, well, they probably just do medicals, and they probably do a lot of medicals.
Yeah,
But
we didn't
those
do any medicals. There was no medicals back then for us.
Yeah,
None.
not back then, not during that era. But at that time, listen, like I said, it's never judge a book by its cover, because you may think the town that may not look like it has a lot going on. Those are sometimes your busiest ones, excluding, of course, the big cities like New York, Chicago, LA. Small towns get their fair share of work.
Well, and the other thing is, listen, that's one thing I always say, like, don't underestimate volunteer fire departments. Just because they're not getting paid doesn't mean they're bad and it doesn't mean that they don't go in the buildings on fire. It just means they're a volunteer fire department. You know what I mean? I was in Montgomery, New York also, and that was a small place, and we didn't do a lot of fires, but there were some very good guys up there that were very willing to go into fires. You know, they worked at the repair shop or at the trucking place, but they were very willing to go into fires. And I think there's a big misconception that the volunteers don't go in and they just throw water in the windows, which makes me laugh sometimes, you know, because I was a volunteer in Newington and then in upstate New York.
Right. No, of course. And everybody, listen, some of the guys that have gone on to have rich histories in the fire service and carve out an excellent legacy, where did they start? In the volleys, you know, and even most of them, of course, you know,
Yeah.
and even those that were already in elite companies, a lot of the guys that were in rescue companies. Look at a Bob Galleon, for example. During his downtime, what was he doing out on Long Island? Being a volley.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a
Bob Morris volleyed.
Yep.
You know, I mean, you know, a lot of you wouldn't know it, but a lot of these guys, you know, they dedicated themselves from day one. And, you know, like when I joined the volunteers in upstate New York, and we can get back to Newington in a minute, but I just couldn't see me watching someone else's house burn down and not do anything. You know, I'm trained. So that's why I joined it. You know, it's my community. Why not? And, you know, there were some guys in the job like, oh, you're an anti-union guy because you're being a volunteer. And I'm like, you're hurting yourself, bro. I mean, you know, where you live, why don't you go to your town meetings and say you want a paid fire department because you're a union guy and watch your taxes go through the roof? I mean, come on, let's be real.
Exactly. You know, you got to be pragmatic about it too. So 1987, after about 9 years, if you count the paid fire department status, it's 7, but total it's 9, counting your cadet years too. You go over to New Britain.
Yes.
Now, for context, for those that are outside the state of Connecticut, give us the scope of New Britain back then and the kind of jobs they were handling for those in the audience not familiar.
Well, New Britain was a neat old city. It was like a New England industrial mill town. You know, it's the home of Stanley Tools. So Stanley Tools for Fafner Bearing was there. North and Judd was there. There was a lot of, you know, the city's nickname is the hardware capital of the world. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it was a population of about 90,000. At the time we were running 7 engines when I first got on, 7 engines and 2 trucks and a chief. And we definitely did our share. We had a lot of industry. But our bread and butter were the 3-deckers. You know, we'd get the New England 3-deckers, the rear porches. We had a lot of 3- and 4-story tenements that we would have fires in. And, you know, another big misconception is, you know, I took a class from Bob Morris, a truck class, because I worked and, you know, this is going to be blasphemy, but I did 2 years in the ladder company, Ladder One in New Britain. I did 2 years in Engine One and 2 years and just under 2 years in Ladder One. And when I was there, I you know, it was just me on the inside, one guy on the outside, one guy on the inside. And I was looking from direction of, you know, how you would prioritize the duties that needed to be accomplished on the inside for the truck if it's just one guy. So how do you prioritize that? And, you know, it was hard to get an answer from anybody because most of them don't deal with that. And, you know, and I used to ask guys, when's the last time you went to the floor above at a good fire by yourself with no radio? And we did that all the time in New Britain, all the time. You know, and they had good fires, just like, you know, Newington had really good fires too. You know, I mean, we had the Pillars fire where, you know, and I spoke on it on Salty about that was my epiphany in Newington, that you know, that's the fire that changed my life, that I swore I would never not be good enough again, you know. Right. So, yeah. You know, we had a 4-year-old girl get killed. We listened to her, we could hear her, we just couldn't get to her, you know, and that's the day I decided that, you know, I was going to learn as much about this job and be as good as I can be at it. You know, I don't know if I ever attained that level, you know, but I damn well sure tried. You know, I mean, you can always be better.
Oh, of course. you're able to evolve, and or at least if you're a good fireman, or it even applies to the police force too. If you want to be the best version of yourself, you have to be able and willing to evolve with
Or
the
at least
time
try.
situations. Yeah, at least try.
You have to set a bar for yourself. And whether you attain it or not, I mean, no one's going to fault you for trying to get there. And that's the thing, is some people, become, and I'm not saying it's a cancer in the fire department, but I think there's a lot of people that are happy with the level they're at because it's just good enough.
Right.
And it's just good enough for the just good enough fire. But if you get the bad fire, are you going to be good enough for that?
Exactly.
We don't train for the kitchen fire. We don't train for the bedroom fire. We train for the bad fire, and that's, what I set my goals at is like, I always wanted to be the guy, and again, I don't know if I ever made it there, but I wanted to be the guy when somebody turned around and say, okay, Timmy's here. If something happens, I know he's going to take care of business. You never know if you get there. When people say you're a good fireman, I think that's enough, So, but that was always my goal. All I wanted to be is good at what I did. That was it,
Right. No, you push the envelope, get to a level where, you build your body up, you build your mind up to it. The more of an understanding you have of these situations, the better you're going to be. And it's funny you say that because I follow John Norman on Instagram, and he often posts about past fires and past lessons that he learned. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, today is 28 years, 1995, this day, the Peter McLaughlin fire.
Pete McLaughlin fire.
He was trying to get out and trying to not ventilate, but go through an.
He was just checking. He was in an adjoining checking to see if there was any fire in the cop loft, checking for extension.
Right.
And
the ceiling collapsed on him.
Yeah. Blew down on him.
So, and somebody commented this, and that person's correct in what they said. These lessons are often learned in blood. That 4-year-old girl, Pete McLaughlin, or as they called him, Sniper. It's heartbreaking, and you wish it didn't happen. But the best thing you can do, if the 4-year-old girl could speak right now, if Pete McLaughlin could speak right now, they would say, learn from this so it doesn't happen to the next person.
That's the goal. I mean, you're only as good as your next fire. And, you talk about guys that are experienced. And I always say, listen, I know lots of guys that have been to lots of fires and they're not that great. Right. Experience, and it's just what you were saying, is experience is only as good as how you apply it to the next fire. If you're not learning anything from the fires that you've been to, then you're, whether you go to fires or not, it's worthless. You gotta take something, and like any class that I do, I say, listen, if you leave here one thing better, just one thing better than when you went to that door, it's a win for me, and it's definitely a win for you. Because if you look at it over time, if you're looking to be one thing better every day, by the end of the week, you're 7 things better. By the end of the month, you're 30 things better. And by the end of the year, 365 things better. And if in the fire service, I don't think we can settle. I don't think we should settle. I don't think we should say, okay, I'm there. I've reached that level. I dedicated myself to engine work, and I made it my point to learn as much as I could about it. So, one, if I'm teaching, I have that answer. And one, if I'm on the fire ground and something goes wrong, I can solve that water issue or I know how to fix it. And then the second, on the, if I'm teaching and someone asks me a question about it, I'll have that answer for them. And I'm still learning. I still take classes, and I'm retired, and I still go to classes.
Right. No. And those are the best instructors, the ones that are still learning themselves. And still, if there's a skill they have relatively down pat, they take time to still work at it. Those are the ones whose classes you want to take.
Well, as instructors also, some guys close their minds and close their thought process, is we can learn something from everybody. There's something that Montgomery does that I could apply to what I do somewhere else, and it might be beneficial. But it's the people that close their mind and thinking they're the one that's teaching them. And there's nothing you could tell me about how you do things that's going to change my opinion or add, to my training. And I always tell guys, listen, when I teach, I say, let's have a discussion. If you agree with me, great. If you disagree with me, even better. Because then we'll have a discussion. And maybe if you come up with something, we come up with an agreement, the next time I do that class, what we talked about, what you told me, will be in that class. So you got to keep an open mind. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat. And, the FDNY way is the FDNY way. But the FDNY has 200 companies, endless resources, you know what I mean? Where, if guys tell me, well, it's just me and one other guy. Right. Oh, well, if you're not doing it the FDNY way, you're not doing it right. How do you apply that? It's just, And to make the long story short, just try to be the best it can be every day. That's all. Be that guy. You want to be that guy. You know, when a chief turns around, you're the guy he's looking for. And that's what I always tried to do. You know, when I was in Newington, when I was in New Britain, when I went to New York, and when I was in Montgomery, I just wanted to be the guy that someone could rely on. That's all. That's all I wanted.
And that's what you were. And that's what you still are.
Well, I hope.
Talking with retired FDNY Lieutenant Tim Klett. This is volume 44, the best of Bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. Now, into that, it segues perfectly into what I wanted to bring up next. So 1990, you go into the FDNY. By this point, it's 12 years of firefighting experience. And like you said, the FDNY way is different from the Newington way or the New Britain way.
Yeah, the New Britain way.
So in terms of, I mean, certain things are relatively common sense across the board in the fire service, but there's certain nooks and crannies that have to be learned here. Did that make the academy harder for you, or did your firefighting experience prior lessen the blow a little bit?
Well, it made it harder simply because, you know, it's the fire service is a very small world, and you try to hide and you try to act like you don't know anything about the fire service. And they, before you even walk in there, they know your pedigree. They knew I had been a paid fireman somewhere else. But no, I don't think it made it any easier or any harder. Only because, you know, I had an open mind about it, and, you know, some of the training was different on what we did in Connecticut. And again, even when I went to New Britain, we trained in house. We didn't go to the Connecticut Fire Academy. We never left the city of New Britain when we went through their training. No, I don't really think it made it that easier. I think that maybe in some sense of the way that only because I knew what to expect with the mask. So if I had an issue with it, I knew how to deal with it. I knew what to expect with like nozzle reaction and stuff like that. So I never got caught off guard. You know, I knew when we were doing the 2.5 that I better dig in, and most guys didn't realize that, and they went for a ride. So in that sense, maybe, but the overall picture, I don't think it made it terribly, you know, easier, a pushover, if you say, because we did no ropes, we didn't do scaling ladders. So there's a lot of stuff we did in New York that New Britain never even broached that subject at all. But no, like I said, New Britain was a great place. There was some great people there. One of the chiefs that was there, Bobby McCran, was just a super dude, and took care of me big time. Where he could have really spanked me a little hard. You know, I was a young kid, did something stupid, not really stupid, but it was, you know. I actually went and worked for another fire department on my days off to decide if I worked for Hartford Fire Department for 2 days. They hired me when I was in New Britain, and I was on my 3 days off, and I said, you know what, let me go see what I think, and then I'll use my vacation. And I decided I was going to stay in Hartford. I would have had a Miss New York's agility test. So I did the 2 days, went back to New Britain. When I got paid from Hartford, I sent the money to their union. I didn't even take it. But I wasn't supposed to work for another municipality. I was under the employment in New Britain. And and so, you know, Bobby McCran could have spanked me pretty hard. And actually he turned it around, and just a quick story about him.
Sure.
Is you know, he could have got rid of me. And I laid it out that day to him after the Hartford incident. I said, hey, listen, you know, I'm testing in New York, blah, blah, blah. And he was really, I mean, he was a great guy, really was. And I said to him, you know what, Chief? I says, if I get a letter from New York, you'll be the first one I come and talk to. And I held my promise to him. I got my letter, I got my car, and I drove to New Britain. Before I even told my father, I went and talked to Bobby McCran. That's the respect I had for him.
Nice.
You know, so
I love that. Yeah, listen, you were able to make
I just wanted to mention Bobby McCran. He was such a super dude, you know.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I have no
He's
problem.
gone now. He's passed away. But he was really, I mean, he was a chief's chief. He took care of the guys. He was just a great chief, I thought. You know.
The last of the old smoke eaters, as a friend of mine put it.
Yeah,
for sure.
He was.
Absolutely. Those of you in the chat, sir, at least one of you in the chat pointed out an audio problem on this headset. So we'll take a brief pause here before I get into or dig deeper into Tim Klett's.
Can't hear you.
Now you can.
Now I can
here because my audio apparently was fading in and out. But while I switch out this headset and you can tell the story, let's go back a bit to you even wanting to go to the FDNY in the first place. What made you interested in the FDNY?
Well, so when I got onto the cadets, I met a guy named Jay Walsh. He was already he was anointed. His father was a captain in Hartford. Ended up being the chief in Willimantic, John Walsh. And so Jay, said, hey, listen, like New York's. So we used to go down to New York and take pictures. In the late 70s, early 80s, we were going down and we're both photographers. So we used to go down there and take pictures, and we really got into the job and we started testing, and we hung out at firehouses. And Jay was really the one guy that swayed me to go in New York. And it was funny. I told my father, once I knew that I wanted to go to New York, I wasn't even a paid fireman yet. This is probably 84-ish. And I told my father that, I was going to be a New York City fireman. I was going to be a paid fireman. I was going to go to New York City to be a fireman, and I was going to work in 69 engine. And 10 years later, that's exactly where I was. My father used to tell people, he goes, this is the only guy that knew 10 years ago exactly where he was going to be.
That's where you ended up.
And I credit that. Jay Walsh was the one who got me into the city. I went to the city in 90, and Jay ended up going in 93, and he ended up working in busy places too. 75 engine. He ended up and then a 33 truck, and then he got promoted with the 59 engine. So
he ended up having a great career in his own right. Now, when you got on, you went to originally engine 47. Now, for context, was that a busy house? Not a busy
Yes, it was.
All right.
Yeah, very busy. So I was pushing to go to 69 engine out of Proby school. Mm-hmm. I had a friend that had a lot of weight, and he said he was going to put me in 69, and I got put in 69. And at the last minute, it got changed. And a very good friend of mine, who turned out to be a good friend of mine, ended up going there instead. He went to the truck instead, and they only allowed one Proby into that house at a time for some reason. Then that's what I was told. And my hook told me, he goes, "How about a good engine in the 5th division?" Because the 5th division still existed. And I said to him, "Whatever you think, whatever you think." He knew the job, and so he put me in 47 engine, which was on 113th Street and Amsterdam Avenue. So it's a really great neighborhood. It's not bad. It's not a bad. It's Columbia University is right there, St. John of the Vine, and St. Luke's Hospital. It's all right there in the three corners. But you drove one block and you were in Harlem. You were in Lower Harlem. We ran it with 58 engine, 37 engine, 35 engine, 80 engine. So all those busy Harlem engines we ran it. We were very busy, but everything we did was second or third due. And I would have stayed there. I love the place. There were great guys there. Lieutenant Brown was there. Lieutenant O'Brien was there. They were great dudes. Bobby Cook, a very good friend of mine, was there. A pretty famous guy named Louis Caccioli. He was a picture on one of the 9/11 books. A super dude there too. They were all great, and they were all really good guys. And if I had stayed there any longer, and this isn't a shot at the company whatsoever. It's to me, it's one of the best companies in that city. It's a beautiful firehouse. It's extremely well kept. They have a lot of pride. I was chasing fires, and 69 was, 1 and 2 in a city for first due fires. And that's the only reason I left that place. The only reason I left. That's the only reason I left New Britain too. I was just chasing fires.
Right.
That's all I was doing.
And that chase brought you to the Big Apple. So, in 92, here you are at the Harlem Hilton, as they call it, and you worked in the same place. You guys overlapped because you got there in 97, I believe, with Ray McCormick, another great guy who have had on the show.
Ray got there way after I got there.
Oh, he went, hang on. I think he got there in 07, rather. I got it confused with 97.
Ray got there in 97. Ray got there in 97. 96, 97 is when Ray got there.
Mm-hmm. And you were there in 92.
The end of 92. Yeah.
Yes. So here you are. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was an until further orders that brought you there. It was temporary until 95, or was it permanent? So
back then there was a term they used as it was called an onion skin. And I don't know why they called them onion skins, but it was called an onion skin. Basically, it's UFO until further orders. So you were detailed to the company, you just weren't transferred there. So I wore a 47 front piece till 95, but I was in 69. From the fall of 92. So, and then the order was official in 90, and I forget whether it was the spring of 95 or a little bit later. That's when the official order came out that I got to sign the 69 engine. But UFO, an onion skin, you're going to go there unless you really screw up. You're not going to get kicked out of there. And it wasn't an easy place to work by any stretch of the imagination. There was a ton of fires, but it was just, with a ton of fires, you have a true ghetto mindset at firehouse. And it wasn't an easy place to work by any stretch of the imagination. But, I was chasing fires and the mindset fit right into me. I enjoyed it, actually, to be honest with you.
That's what I was going to say. It's classic ghetto firefighting. And as I've covered before on this show, people might hear that aren't familiar with the fire service and think, well, why would they call it that? It's not a term to knock the neighborhood down.
No, it's not a derogatory term at all.
You take pride in it. You take pride in it.
It's not. So it's just the mindset. It's not. You know, a ghetto firehouse doesn't. It has no reflection on the community whatsoever. It's the mindset of the firehouse. You know, it's training. It's, you know, it's hard charging. It's doing your job. It's making yourself and your company look good. You know, that's what that term means. It's not a and I know I get it. It sounds like it might be derogatory, but it isn't. It's a mindset thing. It's just it's how the firehouse is run, and it's how it's interpreted. And you know, there's not a lot of them left out there in the city at all that I know about that are true, have that mindset. 48 and 56 up in the Bronx is one that's definitely still has that mindset. You know, it has nothing to do with the community. It has everything to do with the firehouse, you know, and the mindset of that house and that shop and how good they want to be and their reputation. And, you know, their reputation is everything. A good firehouse, doesn't matter which one you're in. Your reputation is everything, that house. And I think one thing that our job did that was at the academy for the rookies, for the probies was, you know, they did a lot of stuff for themselves. You know, you were going to be the valedictorian, or you're going to have the training award and the physical award. And, you know, and when I was in 88, we'll get to that. But, you know, when I got probies, I told them, you don't exist anymore. You know, if you screw up, the company looks bad. And that's what you have to think about. You know, if I screwed up in 69, Timmy Klett doesn't look bad. 69 engine looks bad. And that's what they wouldn't tolerate. You know, I mean, they held you accountable for your job, what you did. And then believe me, they would go around, and if you didn't make your position or if you screwed up your position, they would let you know, hey, listen, if you want to operate that way, there's 209 other firehouses you can work in, you know, and that was that place. You know, it was a fun place to work, a great place to work. But you know what, when it came to produce, you better produce. And you know, I think I was watching some podcast the other day, and that's the thing. That's all you got to do. It's pretty easy concept. Just produce. You know, anybody can talk about it. Anybody can say, oh, yeah, I did this. Just do it. Just shut up and do it.
Right.
You know?
Well, of course. It keeps you honest. You need that accountability because that's going to bring out the best in each member.
Yes.
And that's why it goes back to, you know, where's the FDNY at the end of the day? A paramilitary organization. The United States Army functions the same way. If you screw up, you're going to get reprimanded.
Well, but even if it's even more than just trying to be the best, because even being the best is a singular term if you put it on yourself. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be the best company. And, you know, like, you know, when you talk about producing, and there's a word that goes along with that. And I think it's been lost in the fire service is trust. And, you know, when I look in another guy's eyes and say, hey, we're going to do this, right? And he looks back at me and he says, I got you. Let's go. We're good. I mean, that bond and that connection based on, you know, trust and that ghetto mindset, you know, we're going to go in there and get it done. That's how you produce. You know, you look at somebody else, you say, you're good with this. And they say, I'm good with this. And then you just keep your mouth shut, you produce. I always found that the people that talk the most do the least.
Yeah, that's true. It's not something that just applies to the fire service too.
The people that complain the most
get
the least help.
Right, exactly.
You shut up and you're doing your job, you're washing the rig, you don't say a word, and the next thing you know, guys are helping it. But you're up there, you know, moaning that you're the only one washing the rig because you're a new guy, you ain't getting any help. Just keep your mouth shut.
Right. Complain internally, never externally.
Yeah, cry on the way home, okay?
Exactly. Not there at the firehouse. So for the context, in Engine 69 over in Harlem, tell me about what stretch of Harlem until, basically, what were you covering? What were your borders?
Well, we had a great response area. As first due, we ran from probably 140th Street from 7th Avenue to Edgecombe, and then from 140 all the way up to 155. And that's 7th Avenue to Bradhurst and up on the hill to Edgecombe. So it was a tremendous response district, first due. I mean, we owned that whole northern end of Harlem from 145 north. And that was 10 blocks of, from 145 to 155, you got Bradhurst, 8th, 7th, and Lenox. It was just packed with buildings and people. So, and then, that's just first due. And then our third, our second due kind of went out farther than that. Our third due went out farther than that.
Did you find that area to be a mixture of buildings? Some just have projects, some just have private dwellings, others have cocklofts. Was this the kind of area, since it's so wide, as you said?
No, there was very little there were projects, there were tenements, there were brownstones.
Mhm.
Now, there were a couple of taxpayers, but not a lot. There were a couple of frames, tucked in there that we would go to, but not a lot. So it was all projects, old law, new law, H's, and then brownstones. I always say we were the best tenement firemen in the city, because that was our bread and butter, new law tenements.
Oh, yeah.
Day in and day out, we were going to new law tenement fires. That was the bulk of it.
And you saw a lot of different building construction going across the city. And I feel like that was a sweet spot to be there in 69, 92 to 02, because there's a lot of construction going on across the five boroughs, particularly in that area where you were, to where even though the fire code's there and those who are building it are abiding by it to the best of their capabilities, it's going to mean more work.
Well, what we were going through at the time was, we weren't going through the firestorm of the 70s. That had came and gone. That insurance purposes were gone. They weren't burning for insurance anymore, but they were beginning to renovate. And there was a lot of places that the demolition company would come in, and if the building was fire damaged, they'd get more money to demo the building. And when they demoed a building, the woman that ran the community board up there was very smart in her outlook, 10 years and 20 years out. She wouldn't allow, like, we'd want to tear down these vacant buildings that, I have pictures of vacant buildings where it's just the front wall standing and everything else is collapsed. And those buildings are still there, totally rebuilt. And she wouldn't allow them to tear down those buildings because she had a vision that down the road, Harlem would return, and she wanted the rows of buildings to still be there like it was. Now, there were some buildings that collapsed and the front walls came out and they had to be torn down. But for the most part, if you drive through Harlem now, it looks like it never went through a firestorm because, a lot of those buildings stayed. So, real estate was becoming a lot more valuable and they were starting to renovate. We had a lot of fires up there when they were cutting the oil tanks in the basement and they'd get the sludge in the oil tank going. And they were pretty cool. They were nonsense fires, but you'd turn the corner and you'd think a plane crashed into the building because every crack of the building would be showing black smoke because of the sludge in the oil tank that was burning. But it was just, a fire confined to this oil tank that was producing a tremendous amount of black smoke. We had some renovations that we figured they ran out of money and they torched them. We had renovations where, the building was partially occupied, and because of rent control, those occupants weren't going to leave. There'd be 2 occupied apartments in a 5-story building. And for some reason, they would have fires in the top floor rear and they'd get burned out. So there was a lot of different reasons. It wasn't the same as the burning in the 70s, why they were, and it wasn't nearly as busy, but we were, for that era, for that time period, we were quite busy. Quite busy.
You had more than enough work to go around.
Yeah,
and that's not even. Sorry, to cut you off.
What's funny is you didn't ask me. I always because you had another thing. Do I remember my first fire in New York?
Right.
And when I did the other one, the salty one, they never asked me. They asked everybody else. They never. It was my first run. I was in the firehouse 10 minutes. It was a 4th alarm. Jeez. My first run. My very
47.
first. And it was in 47. It was on 145th Street. We were on a 3rd alarm in 69's district. So I think it was God with a sense of humor that night, like you didn't go to 69, but your first fire is going to be in their district. But it was on 145 at the corner of 7th, the big H. It was occupied at the time, the whole top floor. That building on 145 and 8th, a 7th to 8th, it's an H, the only H on the block. I had a 4th, a 3rd, 3 seconds, and like 5 old hands in that building alone.
My goodness.
Till they renovated, yeah.
Yeah. You'd think after the first one they'd renovate, but no, they wait a little bit.
They wait, yeah. They wait a little bit.
Oh, yeah. A little bit is putting it lightly. Now, I wanted to ask you about this as well, because not only are you dealing with enough fires to go around, like you said, it may not be the war years, but you're still pretty busy.
Yeah.
Now you got the CFRD runs, too, on top of that.
Well, yeah, we didn't. When I first got there, we weren't doing CFRD runs. And then the CFRD came. And, what I find funny about it is that, I got hired under the umbrella that I didn't have to do it. And then it got shoved down my throat. And then subsequent to that, all these people that got hired knowing that they were going to do EMS complain the most about it. It's funny. But the big thing with the EMS runs is when we first started them, we were CPR rigs. So we didn't have the CFR training. They were training the other boroughs. They couldn't train everybody, but they wanted guys to go online. So they were doing CPR training in the firehouses. And once everybody was trained in CPR, we were doing CPR runs before the official start of CFRD. And they trained Brooklyn, the big boroughs first. They did it for a reason, I believe, because when the vote came, they were going to get them back pay because they were doing CFR longer than, Manhattan and the Bronx. Bronx was the last one trained. So we started missing fires because you're sitting on an EMS run. And it was the relationship in the beginning. It's way better now. It's much, much better now because most people, it's 25 years. So most people don't remember. But when we first started, when we first combined, the relationship was not good at all. And, they would hold you and you couldn't leave if they told you to stay. So there was a lot of other things going on and complaints. And so it was rocky road the first couple of years with EMS. They didn't care if you told them, hey, listen, there's a call for a fire down the street. And they say, well, we have a diff breather right here that we can't carry down the stairs ourselves. And so it was a rocky road at best for the first few years. And then slowly but surely, it just like anything else, it's not going away. And it's not going away. So you got to figure out a way to, to make it work. And we did, we did. It's, and now it's what, 25 years, 30 years later, probably.
Almost 30 years. Yeah, it's 27 this year. And it's funny because a lot of the guys and gals that want to get onto the FDNY or have gone onto the FDNY, they start in EMS. That's kind of the new stepping stone, whereas the volleys may have been the stepping stone in years past. In New York City, at least, the EMS core of the FDNY, that division is the new stepping stone.
Yeah, and I mean, they do that. I think it equals the hiring thing. A lot of both my boys are at Baltimore City firemen. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to go to New York, but they lived in an upstate town. And once you took yourself out of that city, you weren't going to get hired. You were competing against too many people that had, excess points. You had veterans with points and legacy points. And, if you went to high school in New York City, you got points. So, they were competing against people that had 15 points before they even wrote the test.
Right. So, yeah, it's tough.
They tested, but they weren't going to, there was, my son wrote a 97, 98, and he was 14,000.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough department to get into. It's a very special few that can, but it makes it all the more impactful when you can get there. But it's funny because, when you brought up diving further into those CFRD runs, I remember my interview with Howard Safer last summer, who unfortunately just passed away.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he passed away actually on the anniversary of 9/11. A sudden health issue. He was 81. Great guy, really, and a unique guy, because right before he became police commissioner, when Bill Bratton left, that was his last act as fire commissioner, was to merge EMS with the FDNY. And the reason why he did that, he told me when I asked him point blank about it, was he happened to be visiting a firehouse. I think it was in Queens at the time. And a lieutenant or a captain was there. And he says to the commissioner, he says, hey, boss, he wasn't trying to bust the guy's chops. He was being dead serious. Like, do you know we have the worst cardiac response rate in the country? And Commissioner Safer looked at him like, what? He's like, yeah, we do. And that got his mind rolling. Well, what if we merged them? And in March of 1996, he did merge them. And there's been some dividends. Like you said, it's much better now. But in the beginning, yeah, I can imagine. They used to have a saying about EMS, those in EMS, every minute sucks.
Well, yeah. And here it is. It doesn't matter what city you work in. It doesn't matter what department you work in, whether it's even a pay. The EMS system is an abused system. The bottom line is.
Oh, yeah.
But and I would tell the guys, I don't get paid. If a guy says he's having a heart attack and he's a mile away, I can't sit in the firehouse and say, well, he's full of shit. I got to go find out. You know what I mean? And most times he has indigestion. Yeah. But for the one time that he doesn't, and you bring the guy back, how do you get mad at that? You deliver a kid or you pull someone. I mean, sometimes like, you walk away from these things, EMS runs, and you feel good about them. But if you do 100 EMS runs, 98 of them are bullshit. They're BS runs, and but it's the system. It's not the people. It's the system itself. I'm not saying that people just call. That's what they use it as. If you're poor and you don't have health care, you use the EMS system for your health care, and that's the essentially what it is.
Spot. You know,
Yeah.
we had a call like that the other day, and for context, for those that may not know, I'm not a fireman myself, but I work in a firehouse in the office setting. But I hear the calls coming in, and I'm in my office typing away at one of my reports when the call comes in for one of our rescues. We call our ambulances rescues, and I kid you not.
A lot of
And
places do.
yep, the dispatcher is cracking up as he's saying this. It's a drunk woman. She's saying, and apparently she called in to say that she's allergic to bees, and she thinks a bee, not that the bee is, but she thinks a bee is in her throat. And out the guys go, lights and sirens responding because this woman is drunk. She's had a few too many. It's 11 o'clock in the morning, and she thinks she has a bee down her throat. So, you get a run like that. But like he said, then you get a run where it's like a heart attack victim, a stroke victim, and then you check back in. They're doing great. And had you not gotten there when you did, they would have died. So,
Yeah.
it has its pros, like with everything. It has its pros. It has its cons. Now, I want to get back to your career for a second because staying with 69, and listen, 10 years there, you caught a lot of jobs. But
Yeah.
I'm sure a few stick out. When you look back, you don't have to say one. Tell me about the jobs that were great jobs, but really kicked your butt in 69.
I had a job at 141 and 7th, and that's the one I kind of hang my hat on. For an Ozzelman, it was an Ozzelman's dream. It was we got there, and it's funny because the two captains, the captain of the engine was Patty Brown. I'm sure you've heard that name.
Oh yes.
And the captain of the truck was Bob Morris that night. I mean, like if you talk about legends from the New York City Fire Department, and if you talk about 10 of them, there's 2 of them, and they were both captains in my firehouse. And I go to a fire with these guys, and we pull up, and it was a corner building, and it's out 2 windows in the top floor, and they both run into the address on the avenue side. And I told this guy Mike Laporta, another super dude. Mike is just a super guy. He was backing me up that night, and I said, Mike, they're going in the wrong building. It's the corner building. He goes, you got to go in the one they went in. I go, Mike, they're in the wrong building. And we follow them in, and I hear when I get in the door, I'm up on the 2nd floor already, heading up the stairs, and I hear Morris yell down, we're in the wrong building. I looked at Mike, and 59 engine drops our hose and runs. So they're going to try to get a line now. So I get out of the building, and Mike's yelling, go to me, go. And I'm running down the street now with the folds in my arm to get around the corner to get in the building before 59. And I look up, and now I don't know what happened, but it's out 8 windows on the top floor.
Jeez.
So we get up there, and Morris and the inside team gets up there, and they can't get more than 10 feet in the apartment. It's got the whole apartment. It's heading for the open door now. And Morris just won't leave. He won't leave the apartment. Patty Brown's trying to get him out of the apartment. And it's kind of comical in a way. And, now the fire's out in the public hallway. And Morris finally ducks out of the way. And I'll never forget Patty Brown looking at me with a smile on his face. He goes, you ready? And I said, I'm ready. He goes, Timster, just like he would call me Timster. He goes, Timster, you ready? And I said, I'm ready, Cap. And in we go. And you know what? With him next to me, and I ended up getting burned, but we marched through that apartment. The whole apartment was on fire. And a guy from the rescue told me, because they brought me down after I got burned and put me in the back of the rescue. And a guy from the rescue said, we came over to McCombs Dam Bridge, and we looked down the block, and we were like, holy cow. So we're starting really getting buttoned up. And when we got off the rig, the last window of fire was going out. So that one really stands out. But there was a ton. There was a fire on Christmas Eve we had, and John Newell was the boss, and he's my, I worked with Patty Brown, I worked with Bob Morris, Pat Welby, but John Newell was my guy. He was just, probably the biggest influence on me as an engine fireman, as an engine officer. And I always tell, and you got to tell everybody this, if you have your mentor, if there's a guy, and everybody has them, and I always tell John, every fire I've been to since you left 69, I've taken a little of you with me to every single fire. And that's what a mentor does, is that every fire you go to, you bring a little of that guy with you, and he was working that night, and we're stretching in, and he yells down now it's Christmas Eve. He yells down the stairs, Noel. And that's the sign that we got to go up the stairs. Now everybody stretching the hose is singing Noel on Christmas. People are looking at us like we got our heads screwed on backwards. Real good fire at the top floor. Christmas Eves were always busy nights. Always busy nights. Some of them, I've had 4 or 5 fires on a Christmas Eve night.
I can see that. Yeah. All the lighting and whatnot.
Busy. That was my favorite night to work. Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, and the 4th of July were three nights I love to work.
I was going to ask him, like, were you busy on the 4th of July? And it makes sense, right? Yeah.
Well, Harlem, not as busy as you'd think. Not as busy. The Bronx was insane back then. But Harlem would do their fires, but not like the Bronx. They were just insane in the Bronx on the 4th of July. But New Year's Eve in Harlem was a good night.
Yeah, no, of course, I can see that. Like I said, because of all the lighting people have on the trees and in the windows and whatnot. Some of that lighting is not that stable. And unfortunately, and it makes sense. A lot of your fires, I mean, listen, you'll get some great jobs during the spring and summer when the weather gets hotter, but some of your more difficult, some of your bigger jobs in general are going to come during the winter because of people using heaters, things like that, the lighting around the holidays.
Well, it's funny is the Bronx, I always felt was a summer place. They did a lot of work in the summer. And Harlem, we did fires. We did as much as anybody in the summer. But when we used to call it the winter offensive. When October 1st came to March 30th, when it started getting cold up there, we rocked and rolled. I mean, we just did. It was some nights were crazy. You'd have 3 sections of 69 engine, because, you'd get a fire, the relocator would get a fire, the second relocator would get there were some nights up there in the wintertime. It was just, and it was the partially occupied buildings because they would turn off all the power to the building and they were trying to keep themselves warm. 3 floors of fire each one, but you'd stretch on a cold winter night 5 times. It wasn't out of the ordinary to do that. And those guys up there, man, there was some super Mike Hayes, Anzalone. I mean, tons of guys up there. Mike Cody. I mean, there was just super guys up there that and I compare everything to when I was in 69 to 28 truck. When I was in an engine, like 88 engine, I look at 38, a great company. And I would look at 28 when I was in the early 90s up in 20. And that place, those guys, I watched Jimmy Cash at a fire and we turned the corner and we'd already had 2 fires in the night tour. And Jimmy Cash always made his position no matter what. And we went for an odor of smoke and we turned the corner. It looked like a steam leak. So we're beat up. We've been up all night and we're sitting on a rig and Jimmy Cash goes up the front fire escape because he had the OV and just made his position, gets the window. And then we hear, hey, we have a job. It's a fire. So we stretch Mike Hayes at the nozzle and we stretch up and Jimmy Cash goes in and he finds a guy in the apartment unconscious, but now he can't go back out the window because the couch lit up. So he's making his way to the door. 28's having a problem with the door because it's a Fox lock. They can't get the bar to jump out of the receiver. So they're working like mad on this door. And Jimmy Cash gets up to the door, knocks the bar out of the way. They get the door. Jimmy Cash and the guy roll out into the hallway and they're both on fire. So Hayes has to put them out before we go in and put the apartment out. And the funny part of the story is they were going to put him in for a medal. They eventually did, but the chief was like, well, what did he do? He's alive. He didn't get killed. I mean, it was, and the chiefs up there was, like giving out medals back then, even unit citations, that very hard to come by. They didn't write you up for nonsense up there. Yeah, but it was great. There was tons of guys, man. Tons of guys.
Well, you got burned, but you didn't die, so I'm not going to write you up for that one. Next.
Next.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. Hard to come by, and they were hard to come by. I mean, what did you have?
And those chiefs, I mean, when I first got there, we had, you talk about true FDNY legends. We had, Cassidy, Bernie Cassidy from 82 and 31 from the book. Mm-hmm. Benny Cassidy in the book is Bernie Cassidy. Tom Kennedy was in 82 and 31. You had Frank Griffin, who was a squad 2, is rough around the edges as you ever want to meet. I avoided him like the plague. And we had Nick Visconti, who was in 50-2. Right. And these guys were they could turn the corner and have from here to the ocean on fire, and they'd be okay. Well, you think you can get this? I mean, nothing fazed them. They were, they were great to learn from, and they were calm, and they let you do your job. They until it was time to say no, but for the most part, they let you do your job.
Right.
It was great. It was a great place to work.
Those generation of firemen were different in all the right ways, to say the least.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of great officers like that. I recall something that Paul Hashagen said about Dennis Mojica in the Still Riding documentary, that he would say, Dennis was never the type of fire officer to yell and scream. very calm. The only thing he would do is sweat a lot.
Yeah.
And that was just his metabolism. But guys like that were calm, that can transmit orders. Because what's the old saying? Calm is contagious. If you're calm,
Sets
the
the
guys
tone.
around you are going to be calm.
It sets. I had a fire. I was an officer, but I had a fire, and I trying to get the truck out of the way. And finally, my nozzle man screams at the truck. He screams it. So I yell back at the nozzle man. And he says to me, "Why are you yelling?" I go, "Well, I figured you yelled. I guess I should. I'm the boss." I said, "Calm down." Like I said, like John Newell was that guy. He never yelled, never anything. And the one thing about him was, and I really patterned a lot of what I did after him, was he was always ready to work, always ready to go to work. Whether it was a water leak, whether it was an odor of smoke, whether it was out the windows, he'd get off that rig. And he was one of the only guys I ever saw that carried the bottle for the rope first due. No one brings it first due, right? No one brings it first due. But he always brought that bottle first due. And I noticed that. And later in my career, I'd show up at second and third alarms at top floor of an H, and I'd be the only officer standing there with the rope and the Clorox bottle. And I'm like, what's happened? It's such a basic tool that and the one thing about it is, even in the engine manual, we tried to put it in there. We'll talk about that, but it's a tool that has a written procedure, but the job doesn't give you the tool. Right.
And that,
the
how is that
make
going to
up
help
the
you?
Clorox box themselves. We have a procedure on the bottle, but the job doesn't give you they don't give you the rope to do it with, So, but John was always that guy. He always was ready to go to work, always, and never excited, never elevated, and the true professional. Even if if you were screwing up, he knew how to reset you. He always seemed to make the right call. And like if I could have ended up half of what he was, if I could have. But, I tried like hell. I don't know if I ever made it, and he's still a very, very dear friend of mine. And he taught with me on the side. It was funny because when I was doing the live burns for the FDIC, I needed to bring a couple extra guys. So I brought John Newell, Mike Hayes, and Ray McCormick. And two of them were my bosses. And now I was their boss at live burn. And I had to pull John Newell aside because he just flowed too much water in this. And I go, "You do know we want to burn this building again." He goes, "Timmy, I was trying to get the guy to shut it down." I'm like, "All right, Lou." But and it was kind of like funny because he was calling me Timmy and I was calling him Lou. But yeah, he's that guy, and there was a lot of great guys up there. I mean, there was a lot of super officers, in that firehouse. Vinny Leahy in 28 truck. I went to I think I said it on the other one. I went to a white ghost that actually it went off with Vinny Leahy on Bravest Avenue, where it actually ignited in the cellar. We had a white ghost go off. They don't even write about them because oil burners are becoming a thing of the past. But
let's dive into that fire. Let's go into depth on that. What happened there?
It was we went for an oil burner right on the corner of Bravest and Bravest between 143 and 144. It's really right on the corner. I actually had a job in that building, went vacant, and then one afternoon in June, we ended up. It's a big 6-story place. We had the whole place, but it was still occupied. And we get in the basement, and I got the can. I'm detailed to 28. Jimmy Skarkas had the irons, another super fireman, and we're in the basement, and we get down there, and it's this real thick vapor, the whole basement's full of it. And Leahy knows what it is, and he goes, "We got to get the power shut off today. There's no remote for the oil burner." So there's a covering officer in the engine, and he went to shut off the fuel tank so it would stop supplying fuel to the oil burner. And I'm standing there, and I'm looking at the covering officer in the engine, and I'm looking at Vinny in the oil burner. It was a real small room, and me and Skarkas are standing next to each other, and I see Leahy slap at this wire. Because there was the power wire to the unit. He was just going to break it off so it would shut the unit down. And when he hit it, it arced. And at that instant, I saw a ball of fire come out of the oil burner, and it hit him in the face. What I saw, from here up was all red and in his face. So it came out of the room. Now all you heard the irons go up, and you heard the can hit the ground, the hook hit the ground, and so just the whole basement, it ran right across the basement. It lit up, and then it went out. And we had some paper burning over there and some cobwebs a little bit, but it just really went out. So I run into the oil burner with the can, and Vinny had ducked like this, and it went like this, and his hair was all singed. And he looked at me, and I look at him, he goes, boy, that was close. Just like that. And I'm like, close. I got to go change my underwear, bro. I mean, come on. But those guys, nothing fazed them. They'd seen it all. Vinny Lay worked in 33 truck as a fireman. When they were burning up there, just like any part of the city, it was busy. Those guys that you were working with in those days, they had seen everything. That was, the one good thing about working in, from 1990 on is that I got to work with all those warrior guys. Do you know what I mean? I didn't go through them. We were busy for that period.
Sure.
But I got to learn from guys that were incredibly busy and nothing rattled them. And, I think the farther we get from that, even though, I try to pass it down and the guy I give it to tries to pass it down, you lose a little, like telling a story. By the time it gets back to you, it's a totally different story, right? And I think you lose a little bit of that as you move away from it. It's not like John Newell who'd been through it, or Vinny Lay who'd been through it, or Cassidy and Kennedy, that you're getting it firsthand and you're seeing it. Griffin used to wear his bell cap. None of them wore masks. He wore a vinyl jacket and his bell cap. He'd be up on the fire floor, telling, hey, get in there and put it out. He told 59 engine one night, if you don't put it out, I got 69 here that will.
Enough motivation there.
It was a little bit of motivation.
Oh yeah.
But those were those days, and that was it. It was about producing and doing your job and, making the company and making the battalion look good. That went on everywhere in the city. All those busy companies, they all beat their chest. There's no question about it. Like I just saw Hank Malay put something up about it. Sounds like a Brooklyn day. Yep. And I love seeing that because that's pride, man. That is pride. There it is.
Yep. He's a 175 guy.
Like, listen, and if I said, that's BS, and we were the busiest, we're going to lock horns over it. And that's because that's that ghetto mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, listen, we're the busiest. No one was busier than us. And there probably were, but you had pride and you produced. And if someone questioned, you said, yeah, well, tonight when we go on the fire, you watch what we do. And that's what made those companies so great, whether they were in Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx or Manhattan. There were great companies in all those places, proud companies with great officers and great firemen. So, I love seeing stuff like that. We were the best, though. We were busier than they.
Hank's a great guy. He's been on the show a couple of times. And, besides his time in 175, he was in this little company. Perhaps you've heard of them, Rescue One from 1986.
Who's that?
Yeah, who's that?
Who is that? Rescue One. Rescue One.
Never
Don't get me started.
Great fire, but also Squad 288 from 1998 until he retired in 2002. Very distinguished career for my friend.
Yes, very, very distinguished.
Good.
You'll hear about these guys. Don't worry. I needed a podcast to hear about them.
Oh yeah.
You'll hear
Mike,
names,
he says also to be Mike many years in 132 as well. Yep. Besides 175.
Another great shop, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Legendary shop. But
some of us, that's the thing. Some of us get, just because you're in a sole place, you didn't have the privilege of I worked in busy places. I was lucky. 47 by every stretch of imagination was a busy firehouse. Even New Britain was a busy volunteer paid fire department. I went to a lot of fires. I learned a lot, but then I went to 69 engine. I was there for 10 years. Went to a ton of fires. I got promoted and landed on my feet in 88 engine, and I did 19 years there, which is a busy place. So the only thing that makes me different, I was lucky enough to work in a busy place and learn from the greatest firefighters this earth has ever seen. And those were those guys from the 70s, the late 60s, 70s, and 80s. Those were, there were no better firemen anywhere on the face of the earth ever. And I was privileged to be able to learn from those people,
Absolutely. And not only that, but you've passed it on, like you talked about earlier, which
is
important too. Yeah. As much as you learned, you try to store it away up here. And if you could share that, even if it's just a smidge of what you learned with the next generation, it certainly goes a long way. Back to your career, though, for a moment, in that from September 11th onward is a unique time in your career because that event happens. And it's very tragic in its own right with the devastation on the FDNY with the losses of 343 members. And then in the heels of this, it's a bittersweet moment because then you're promoted to lieutenant in the spring of 2002, which it's a nice moment in your career, but it comes, during a time in which.
Well, it was even more bittersweet because I got promoted. My promotion date was the day after my mother's funeral.
Oh my goodness.
So,
I'm sorry.
and, I remember her telling me, because I wasn't sure whether I wanted to be promoted. I was like, I don't think I'm ready. Should I take it? One of the last things she told me was, if you don't take this promotion, I'm going to come back and haunt you. I don't want to get hit by any haunted frying pans, So
Yeah, there you go. So you took it.
Yeah, it was the day after my mother's funeral, I got promoted, and the next day was the day we took the last beam out of the trade center site.
May
So
30th,
my mother's
2000.
funeral promotion, and then we took the beam out of the trade center site.
So that's a lot. And after 10 years in 69, now for a brief period, you're also working in the Bronx in a ladder company, which I believe was 50 truck.
I went to 50 truck, yeah, UFO,
So,
right away to 50 truck.
Yeah, so this is interesting in that, I mean, of course, I'm sure you've ridden in ladder trucks before, going back to your time as a cadet in Newington, but to be in a ladder company after so many years as an engineman, and now you're a new fire officer, it wasn't that long. It was only May to August before you went to HQ, but tell me about those 3 months in 50 truck.
Well, like when you look at firehouses, a lot of firehouses have bad reps. I'm not saying 50 truck did. I'm not saying that, but it was a slower place. And I was lucky. I went there, and the crew of guys that I worked with there, they were young, they were go-getters. They were in a place that didn't do a lot of fires, but they wanted to be good at the fires they went to. One of the things that was hard for me to get used to, and it always was through my career as an officer, being an engine for so long, is that you have people that are working remote from you. So in the engine, I got my nozzle firefighter, and I got my backup, and I got a control guy that comes up, and I got my chauffeur. So the only one who's really not with me is going to be my chauffeur, and I know he's going to be okay because he's not going. If he's in the building, he's doing something wrong. But in the truck, I can't tell you the number of times that somebody said, "Hey, the OV's calling you," or "the roof's calling you," and it kind of heightened my alertness. It made me a little bit better because I had not only I had to listen for everything, but it made me more aware of a lot else that was going on. Where in the engine, even with the nozzle, I could, I wasn't listening for the roofs open. I was listening for "Let's go, Timster." So it was a learning curve, but it was also a great learning experience for me. Helped me become an officer because I set my tone right away as an officer. I mean, I was a driller. I was a guy that liked to drill. And that was my non-negotiable as an officer. I mean, we were going to do something firematic. Even if we sat at the kitchen table and talked about a fire, I didn't care. But we were going to do something firematic on the day tour and on the night tour. I don't care what it was, but we were going to talk about fires or we were going to go do something. And, to the credit of 50 truck, we had gotten a new Hearst tool in. And so we're going through it in the firehouse. And I said to the senior guy, I go, you get a bunch of car fires out on Zariga Avenue, don't you? He says, "Yeah, we had 2 last night." I go, "You think they're still there?" He goes, "Yeah, there's a bunch there." I go, you want to go out and, really put some stress on his tool and play with it? He goes, and he looked at me, he goes, "We can do that?" I go, "We can do anything you want to do. I'm here to the end of the tour." So we had lunch. We mount up after lunch. Now it's 4:30, 4:45, and we're still there. And, they're asking me now, "Hey, do you mind if we try this?" They wanted to see if they could put the spreaders on the ground and, without it kicking out like that to lift the car. So listen, I said, "I'm here till 6. Stay as long as you want." We stayed till like 5:30 drilling, and to the credit of them, they, because they got that new tool and they went out there and they took over the drill. It was their drill. I didn't jump in. So, I learned a lot working in the truck about being aware and being a little bit more, take more in, instead of just focusing on the one thing. Like as an engine, you're focused on the fire. You're focused on how to get the line there and the fire itself. It forces you to be the truck officer to really widen your perspective. You're looking a lot more than that engine. And hopefully the engine officer is looking a lot more. But a lot of times you kind of get focused. Okay, there it is. How am I going to get it in? Third line, am I going to drop the rope? Where am I going to drop the rope? So you kind of narrow your perspective. And I think it forced me in the couple months I was there to really widen and we had a couple fires to widen my perspective a little bit more and take a little bit more in and have the ability to apply what you took into your decision making, as that truck boss, because there's a lot going on for the truck. And he's making more than one decision because he's got the people with him. He's got an OV and he's got a guy on the roof, and he's going to be getting asked questions. Hey, can I take the windows? Can I take the bulkhead? You know, where do you want me to point the can? There's a lot going on. Whereas the engine, I hold the flash heavy and I point, you know. So
that way.
there it is. Go get it.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not minimizing the engine officer because, you know, I think the engine officer is the second best position in the fire service solely because normally the engine's there first. You know, I was always the first one in the fire department if I could get in before the truck. But the decisions that the engine officer makes has a direct impact on the outcome of that fire. You know, the size and placement of that first line has a direct impact on that fire. And that's why I like that responsibility. You know, I mean, there were times like it got boring in an engine. You're watching all the truck guys up there and they're coming out, they're all salted up and you stood out there because you were third or fourth due with your thumb in a place it shouldn't be, you know. But nature of the beast.
Right.
You know, you win some, you lose some.
Right. And that's, you know, kind of an ultimate crash course in how to be a fire officer. You're not going to learn it overnight, but things like that help you to at least hone your craft. And there's no one size fits all style of how to be a fire officer because different situations, different companies, especially in a city like New York where no neighborhood is the same. But at least you have a general idea. And at least as it seems and how you explained it, you have an identity for how you want to operate as a fire officer. And that's going to go a long way.
Well, listen, I always looked at it this way. You take care of the bros. That's what you do. You take care of the bros. In the firehouse, I never asked anything from the firemen. They knew I was going to drill. I didn't have to ask. I didn't ask anything from them. I always, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Mm-hmm. Right? So the roles get reversed on the fire ground. Now I need something. I need you to do this. And I need you to do this. So, you know, I think as an officer for me, you know, like I had that attitude, like in the firehouse, I took care of the bros. Whatever they needed. They needed a quick tour off. You know, they need to take a flyer. You know, whatever was I worked in 69. Mm-hmm. So my threshold for paying and what I was willing to do was a lot higher than a lot of guys. And there was a lot of senior guys in the 18th Battalion were the same way. And I never asked for anything from the firehouse. I didn't ask for a special dinner. I didn't ask, hey, can we go to the parts store? You know, if they're, you know, never asked them to do anything special for me. But on a fire ground is when you ask them. Now I'm asking you. So that investment you made in your firefighters, you know, to make their day-to-day business, their day-to-day routine a little easier, pays a dividend on the fire ground. You go, hey, are you good with this? You're going to do this for me? You know, now I'm asking. Now I need something from you. I need you to produce. That's what I need. You know, and I think, you know, it worked for me. It did. You know, there were some times like, you know, being a boss isn't easy because sometimes you got to be a boss. It's as simple as that, you know, like some guys don't embrace, I didn't embrace it, but I had no problem being the heavy if I had to be, you know, because I realized that if you're in my office, you're there because of you. Now I'm not looking to getting anybody's grill, get anybody's face, but you're there now because of you, not because of me. Like, hey, bro, you made the company look bad. You know, I just did a class and a guy said that a chief came in and he was breaking chops about guys wearing Crocs and not the right duty shirt. And I told the guy, I said, in the firehouse, I was happy if they were wearing clothes, you know, and because in the firehouse, I didn't, you know, but you go out, you go that door, that threshold, it's like a time warp. You go through that doorway, you better be a professional. That's what I'm looking for. That's when I need something from you. In the firehouse, whatever you need, you got it. Out there, I'm asking you. You got to be a professional. Can you do this? That's the dividend. I thought, at least, of being an officer.
Oh, of course. Yeah. You know, it makes a lot of sense, too. I mean, that's if you're taking care of them in the firehouse, then they're willing to pay it back. I mean, they'll do it regardless because they're professionals. But if you're someone that's not taking care of them, they'll do it, but they're going to sigh and grumble and mumble about it. But if you're good to them in the firehouse, oh, man, you could get them to run through a brick wall for you.
2 words I don't want to hear. I don't want any doubt and I don't want any hesitation.
Right.
You know, and that, you know, that trust factor and like for officers, I think officers lose the fact that, you know, that the trust thing for the officer is interlaced with the firehouse. You know, like you can't be one person in the firehouse and then be a different guy on the fire ground. Do you know what I mean? That word trust is a little bit interlaced. In my book, at least it was interlaced. And so, you know, if they don't trust you to do the right thing in the firehouse, even like, oh, that guy's going to hook us, you know, whatever, you know, I'm not going to say they're not going to do their job. You know, I'm not saying that at all, but you know, maybe that translates into you getting off that rig and I don't have to give orders anymore because they're just doing it on their own because they know what I expect, you know, I don't have to say, hey, this is a 2.5 or 1 3/4 inch. I don't have to say, hey, we're going up the front fire escape or we're going to drop it out the half landing window. So that's that investment that you've made in training and whatever you do in a firehouse that pays its dividend on the fire ground. When you get off that rig and you see them, they're grabbing the roll-ups already without me saying, hey, I want the roll-ups. And that's what I always wanted. They said, hey, guys kept asking me, you want the roll-ups? And finally, I told the senior guy, I go, listen, I don't ever want to hear that question again. You get off that rig and you grab the roll-ups. If I don't want them, I'll tell you, but I'm sick of getting asked. Don't ask me anymore, right? You should get off that rig, ready to go to work and get those roll-ups. If I think it's nothing, if it's a gas leak, I don't want the roll-ups, but you better be getting off that rig every time. If we go to that building that requires roll-ups, with that roll-up on your shoulder until I say, hey, stand down, bro.
Yeah. No, Phil Ruvolo got to a point in rescue too, to your point about that, where I remember Bob Gallione telling me this as well. They would get off the rig at a job, and Phil almost looked like a conductor of an orchestra because he would just point. He didn't even have to say anything anymore. He would just point, and his men were so in tune with him, they knew exactly what he wanted, and they'd go to that spot. And he could be pointing anywhere, but they knew what he meant, and they'd go.
And I'll make a little waves with this, but I think I haven't done it. But based on my perspective of it, I think it's a lot easier to be an officer in a specialized unit, in a SOC unit, a squad, or a rescue, because everybody in that unit is gung-ho to begin with. You're not getting any slackers. Everybody in that unit wants to drill. No one complains about drilling when you're in those units, and you don't have some of those administrative issues of that lack of enthusiasm. So I'm not saying it's totally easy to be an officer in a squad, I think, or to rescue. I just think when it comes to stuff like that, because all those guys are so super dedicated, they're the best of the best.
Right.
And they're so super dedicated, so super motivated that, I don't even need to prod them. I'm just going to, okay, you here. Sometimes I have to talk a guy through a fire. Sometimes I got to say, hey, bro, either you do this or I'm doing it. But this fire, 88's putting this fire out. I've had that conversation on the flare for a couple of times. Like either you do it or I do it. And I said, I told him, I go, but if I do it, it's not going to go good for you. I put it right. And then I get right in behind him. I push the backup guy back and I get right behind him. And we go through that. Now in the rescue squad, you'd never have to have that conversation. In the rescue squad, you've got to grab the guy by the collar and hold him back and say, whoa, wait a minute. Where in some line companies, not all of them, they gotta know you're there. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
I think I never worked in one of those units, but I know a lot of people in them, and I know they're all, top notch, trained to the gills, ready to go to work, and super motivated. That's why those units are those units. That's why there's always this with those units. Like I always said, I don't need him in an all hands. I really don't even need him in a second alarm. But when the crap is on, when the poo-poo's on, I'm the first guy to be glad that I see them there. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, when we had a couple fire, I worked with Jimmy Ellison in a fire one night. It was really going south. And Jimmy was in the same apartment. Rescue was in the apartment with me, and we were in the apartment together. And, maybe that it has a calming on each of us, but I don't think I needed to calm the rescue down. And I wasn't, but it was starting to go south. They couldn't find it. It was banking down. It was getting warm. We couldn't find it. And you know what? That's when I want those guys there. That's, they have the experience that they apply to every fire they go to, So, it would have been fun to work in one of those companies with 6 guys that are on the same page as you are, Right. And in a regular company, I don't think you have that all the time. I always tell everybody, if you're an officer, like you're an officer in a company, what level do you work at? Your weakest member's level. So as an officer, it's your job to try to get that member to where you are. Now, does it ever happen? Or sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But you work in the realm of the weakest member. If I got to slow down and talk a guy in, if I got to watch a company stretch, that's a reflection of me. So that's my problem. I've got to get that guy up. Where in those rescue companies and the squads, they're just super motivated dudes. They all want to be there. They want to go to work, and they're good at what they do. I mean, I would never take that away from them. They're very good at what they do.
Oh yeah. No, like you said, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So you try to work, you try to make those weaknesses into a strength. All of a sudden, that firefighter becomes a heck of a lot better, and you feel good because you were able to help them get there. Before I dive into you getting to Engine 88 and 03, question in the chat from Steve Iorado. He says, Tim, was John Arnott still at 50 truck when you got there in 2002?
I don't know. It's been so long, and I was only there for such a short period of time. There was a guy, George, the senior guy, George. He lived out in Frogs Neck, was there. I can't say whether he was there or not. What years was he there? Does he know?
Yeah, Steve, put that in the chat if you can, because he mentions I was on a scuba diving vacation with him back in like 1998. So if you remember the years that John Arnott was there, put it in, and I'll get to it later. But 2003, getting into double eight at this time. Now, again, you gone to jobs in the Bronx with 50 truck yet, even though, like I said, it was only a 3-month stint. Now you're in an engine in the Bronx, and it's different from place to place. Harlem's kind of similar with what's going on. I mean, but on the grand scale, the way you fight a fire in Manhattan is different from Brooklyn, different from Queens, and so on and so forth. So being in a Bronx engine, was it a tricky adaptation, or given how busy you were in '69, was it not that much of a change at all?
Well, so the 88th district is, if you want to learn how to be a fireman, the only thing we had, everything. We actually had one commercial high rise. So any building you can imagine. I don't know if we had any true Queen Anne's, but other than that, we had every building, row frames. We had O-laws, new laws, H's, taxpayers. We had high-rise MDs, and we had one commercial high-rise on Fordham Road, right at the corner that Sears Plaza was technically a commercial high-rise. So to learn how to be a fireman, it's a great neighborhood. But I think like the frames, I was a fireman, but I was a fireman in New Britain, Connecticut, and that's all we did was frames. So I don't think the frames are any surprise to me. What I did learn was, again, kind of what I just talked about is, a friend of mine, Mike Hayes, he got promoted. He got promoted. We studied together, and he ended up he got assigned a 38 truck. I got assigned an 88 engine in the same order, and we worked together. As firemen, but that happened a lot. Like firemen, they would always make that circle. It was the 6th and 7th division. I don't know, in Brooklyn, it was probably the 15th, and wherever they would go from the 15th, and then they would try to get back to the 15th. In the Bronx as well, they had the 5th division, the 6th division, 7th division, and then they did away with the 5th, and it was the 6th to 7th division shovel. And so Mike told me, he goes, just don't expect them to operate the way we did in Harlem. And my first fire in 88 as a boss was a project, and I'm waiting for the line to show up. And it was I was the officer. At the end of the day, I was the officer. It was my fault. It was my first time in this building. There were 3 independent stairways. When I saw the hallway, I should have realized there had to be another stairway. If you don't understand NFP 1403, NFA 14, you know that the outlets can't be any more than 150 feet apart. So this hallway had to be 300 feet. And I should have realized there had to be another stairway at the other end of the hall, and I didn't. So they stretched out of that stairway, and they came up short by about 5 feet because they added 48 links. But they stopped at a set of fire doors. And I'm waiting at the apartment for them. I'm waiting and waiting. I'm like, where is this line? And I went back, and they were at the fire doors, and they said, oh, we always wait at the fire doors. I'm like, well, not when I'm working. You come to the door to the fire department. That's why we have the door closed. What are we waiting at the fire doors for? And then we ended up coming up short, and 45 engine actually put my fire out. It was one of my biggest, regrets of my career was my first fire in 88.
There'll be plenty more.
But you learn a lot. You just, if you stay in the game and you want to be good, you've got to adapt, and you've got to adapt to your surroundings. And the bulk of what we did, we were still doing a lot of tenements, but we did a lot of frames. And frames were great. There was always a lot of fire, a lot of smoke, but they did go out quick. If you could get good water in there, they really went out really quick. And then it became a truck fire because they'd be chasing it around all over the place. But getting in there and making a hard push in a frame isn't like going down a long hallway in an H or an O-law tenement. Some of those hallways are 40 feet before you even opened up into any rooms. So, but it was just a matter of adapting, and then adapting to being, I give these officers classes. I just gave the lecture, and there's a thing I found in a book I read about the German army and everybody hates, but it's something that one German unit commander said, and I think it's really pertinent to what we do. And I think for some officers, it's a bridge too far. And the statement is the enthusiastic acceptance of responsibility is the most dominant characteristic which we must demand of our company level officers. And when I read that, it just blew my mind. I'm like, holy, the enthusiastic acceptance of response. You are now responsible, and I think for some guys, it kind of clouds their decision making. But at the end of the day, we still have a job to do, and being responsible for not only yourself but other firefighters. And that was one of the bridges that I had to cross, because the way I operated as a fireman, I couldn't operate that way as an officer anymore, because I had 3 other people that were relying on me to either be there or whatever it might be, So, but that's the big thing. I mean, you are now responsible, and you're going to have to adapt to that.
Right. No, and not everybody's willing to take on that responsibility. Some people in general, not just in the fire service, would want to shy away from it because, listen, when it hits the fan and something has gone wrong, what's the natural instinct? To shy away. No, but you know what? If you're going to
say it, then you do it.
Exactly. But if you're going to want to put yourself in that position to be a fire officer, where, as I've covered many a time before with previous officers across different ranks, it's not just about you, it's about your crew as a whole and taking
it's about
care of
them.
Everyone. Exactly.
I'm the last guy in that pecking order. By far, I'm the last guy in that. It's got to be about them. They all say the mission, the men, and me. But here's the bottom line with that statement. Everybody goes, yeah, hoorah, the mission, men, me. But without the men, there's no mission.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't invest in the firefighters, the mission's a failure before you leave the firehouse. So, you can almost flip that around there, because, if I don't train them and prepare those guys to produce, then the mission's a failure. Do you know what I mean? And then I'm the last guy. I'm the last guy in that pecking order. And if you think you're ahead of those guys, you're out of your mind. That they have to come first. Right. They have to.
Yeah. No,
you want to, and be decisive, make a friggin' decision. Oh my God. You see guys that can't make a decision. Holy Christ. Like, what do you think I should do? I think maybe you should find another job.
I asked that same question to Jay Jonas a few months ago when he was on the show back in June. And he kept it short and simple, as he always is. He's like, you work for the men. That's it. You work for the men. They don't work for you. You work for them. And I love that.
You do, like I said earlier, you do. But like on game day, now I need something from you.
Right.
And that's that hierarchy of like, yeah, I'm working for you guys. I am for you 100%, because fires are 10% of our time. Mm-hmm. But that 10% of the time, now I'm asking you. Now I need something from you, and it's to produce.
Right.
And that's, I think that has to be that handshake, that hand in hand between. And I think, New York City does a very good job. I think there's, do we have weak officers? 100%. Everybody does. But do we have great officers that accept that responsibility enthusiastically? Yeah, we have tremendous officers. We really do. I mean, I think that's why we do some of the stuff we do, is we got tremendous firefighters, but we have a great officers corps too. We really, really do. They know what they're doing. The decision making is there, and like the 18th Battalion. My last year I had 29, 30 years on the job, and there were nights I was working that I was the junior officer in the battalion.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a fact. I'm not joking around. I mean, you had a Principio in 58 truck who had 40 years. You had Billy Donlin, who had 36 years and 45 engine. You had Whitey in 56 truck that has 36 years. Joe Huber in 38 truck had 34 years. I was like the junior officer with 30 years in the 18th Battalion. It says a lot. Most of the guys have moved on and retired. Whitey's the only one still working. And Billy Donlin is too, yeah. But, a super, super, super officers corps on that job. And I think they train them well. And I just, I think it's the backbone of the fire service, and understanding, like Jonas said, we do work for them 10% of the time. Now I need something from you.
Oh, yeah. I'm a Yankee fan, so I'll use a sports analogy here, right? Jim Leyritz. Here's a guy that during the regular season back in the day, that he put up these grandiose numbers. No, not necessarily. He was a good catcher. He was a good player, but he wasn't one that was going to wow you with the statistics during the regular season. But when any Yankee fan who remembers that time, those championship years of the late 90s, when the postseason came around, you guys remember this, and anytime you needed a big hit, Jim Leyritz was the guy you wanted.
I was working the night he hit his home run. I was
against Atlanta in 96.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I was working on it.
Game 4 off Mark Wohlers, baby. Yeah, great
Yeah.
memory there.
Yeah, and we were right across the bridge in Harlem from Yankee Stadium. We were right there.
Not bad.
Right across the McCombs Dam Bridge there.
Right there. Not a bad detail to have at all. So, you know, one of the things I want to hit on, it's been the hour and a half has flown by. I don't want to keep you too long. It's been a heck of a conversation with you.
I'm retired.
There you go. Is around close to the end there before you left in 2000.
Can we just talk about one thing real quick?
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, whatever you want to talk about. Go ahead.
One thing I was involved in, and it's kind of a funny story about it. I was involved in the 9/11 memorial. I was one of the guys, and you know, besides the engine manual, that was one of my prouder moments. There was 9 of us that ran that Madison Square Garden thing, and I was in charge of the transportation. So I spent $1.5 million renting limos and stuff and moving people around. Whether, you know, I did a good job or not, it was a Herculean effort to do that. But the funny story about the day that morning, the way we had designed it up to move all these cars around, we had them by zones, and each car had a color to it. So because you couldn't get everybody back in the same car when they left. So they had to get into a car with a blue piece of paper in the window, you know? So then we had all these other cars. We had 5 limos in the blue region and 5 limos in the orange region and 5 that were just in case no limo showed up. It's like a half an hour before this thing's starting, and I get a call on my phone that they gave to everybody, call this guy if the car doesn't show up. And I answer the phone. He goes, "Hey, this is Pete Gansey." And I almost hung up the phone because I'm like, this isn't funny. This is, you know, I forget his kid isn't named Pete. The only car not to show up that morning was Pete Gansey's. So I said, "Where are you?" And I said, "Stay there." And I called the blue region. I said, "Send every limo, send whatever I got left, get him to that house right now." And I tried to get a Nassau County police car to escort, you know, and I think we did get an escort from the city in to get that car there on time. Yeah. But I just wanted to tell that story. Huh?
I think he's a battalion chief now.
He is a battalion. I think he's in the 19th battalion up there.
Yeah.
I think he's in the 19th. But I just wanted to tell that story about, you know, I was very proud that I was one of the 9 guys that ran that whole thing at Madison. It was, like I said, it was, you could do an hour and a half on what we had to go through to run that thing, you know, with all the stuff that was going on after 9/11.
Oh yeah, every year the ceremony is important, but that was the first year.
That was the very first one, and we had the Father's Day fire fatalities also.
Oh yeah, the anniversary of that in June of 2000.
Yeah, but they never had a Memorial Day for those guys. So I had 354 line of duties I had to take care of, something like that. 350. I forget it was because we had some EMS too.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, from that time frame. Yeah, that was not easy. And people, you know, listen, anybody that was a New Yorker during that time can tell you, you know, 2002, 2003 was kind of this uneasy, okay, we're trying to find ourselves and be New York again, but it was an odd time. I feel like those first couple of years weren't great for the city because you guys were just trying to recover. You were in a
poured rain that day too. I mean, like, why that day? But it poured rain that day.
You know, you talk about a leader, just Pete Gansey Sr.
I couldn't believe it. I'm like, oh my God, the one car that doesn't show up.
Yeah.
You know, so, but I wanted to tell that story.
No, I'm glad you did. But Chief Gansey, you know, there was a guy that, you know, and again, Commissioner Safer said this at the time when they interviewed him about it in 2001. He said you wouldn't find Pete 5 miles away in some command center. And when Mayor Giuliani asked him, hey, you know, come with us where it's safer, he's like, no, I'm not leaving my men. Simple as that. Chief of department did not have to be that close.
Where I was a volunteer in, I think, 2017 or something like that, maybe not that long ago, maybe 2015, I think it was. They finally dedicated a 9/11 memorial in front of the firehouse in Newington, Connecticut. They took a couple of years, got a piece of steel and did it. So they asked me to come up and say a few words. So I did. And one of the things I said is, like, you know, losing Pete Gansey on that day, I mean, to put it in perspective, I said it would be like losing losing Eisenhower on D-Day. You know, that's what it was. That was the parody of when they told the chief of department, you're you know, like, and we all knew who he was and what he represented and you know how he was. He took it to bros. You know what I mean? And then here the guy had been killed in the collapse. It was like losing Eisenhower on D, and that's the analogy I use. It would be like losing Eisenhower on D-Day, losing Pete Gansey on the day of 9/11.
And not just him, First Deputy Commissioner Fian, a wealth of knowledge as well. You know,
Barbara, all of them. all of them.
Downey. Yeah.
Downey. I mean, like the list just goes on. I mean, you just, so.
Oh yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, tough time. But you guys got through it as only you guys can. It was tremendous resilience. Now, much like it was 9 of you planning that particular ceremony back in 2002, fast forward 2019, 2020, it's 2020-ish, I should say. It's about 7 of you trying to rewrite the engine operations manual. Now, it's tough because there's a lot of history there, but like you alluded to earlier, tactics have changed, tools have changed, the city has changed. So as far as the process to sitting down with these guys and saying mutually, you know what, we should tackle this. Tell me about that, then the actual process of rewriting it.
It started like this. It started around the summer of 2019. Ray McCormick was down there, and he frankly started rewriting a lot of our books, and so he tasked between Frank and Ray, they wanted to put together, and he did put together a great group. Of guys from all the boroughs. The only thing that I said at our first meeting, we only had one fireman, and he was a great guy. He was from 255 and probably the smartest chauffeur I've ever met. But I said, we need more firemen. We need at least one more fireman on this. We had officers, we had a chief, we had captains, we had lieutenants, we had one fireman. And I said, we're writing a document for firemen. We got to put another fireman in this group. They didn't do it. So, but when you look at that old journal before we rewrote it, and we wanted to try to condense it down, take some of the training bulletins that, why would you have to go look into another book like the Evolutions to talk about engine stuff? So we wanted to put it all in one book, and Lieb had his ideas of how he wanted to format it. But if you looked at the old book before we started, a couple of the Evolutions, Stretching Up an Aerial was one of the old Evolutions in that you had pictures of, and it was a wooden aerial. This is 2019, and the picture was a wooden aerial, and the other one was using the hose roller and stretching to the roof with the hose roller. And there are 2 rigs that were parked in the street were like 1940s B model Max, So the books needed to be looked at again. Andy Fredericks was involved in, I believe, around 92. They looked at them, but not in the extent that we did. And there were some things we wanted to change. We wanted to make it more so we didn't want robots. We didn't want you to read a book or read a document and become a robot. But we wanted to give you the tools you need to make the proper decisions. So they sent out a lot of questionnaires to engine officers. And we found that, most officers agreed with an 1 3/4 in a store fire that's on the first floor of a tenement. Do you know what I mean? But most of them wouldn't do it, and it wasn't because they were afraid of the fire; they were afraid of the chief. So that's a problem. When that you're afraid of the chief and not the fire. So, we looked at it, we reorganized it. I was very proud of the book that came out. We worked on it for a long time. Unfortunately, Ray retired in March of 2020, I believe. He got out. And, a funny story about Ray retiring. It's not really funny, but about a year earlier when he got hurt, I saw him at the Rock, and they were evaluating the thermal imagers now for the engines. He was working overtime in 69 that night, and I was working in 88. And I joking around, I go, well, you know what, Ray, if you're lucky, we'll invite you to a fire in the Bronx tonight. And sure enough, we have a 4th alarm. We're first due. And it was a channel rail fire. Got the channel rail. It was in the cockpit. It took off. It was all over the building. We got trapped on the top floor for a very short period of time, but it was one of those fires. So 69's coming on the 4th alarm, and they hit a pothole, and Ray gets launched vertically and breaks a vertebrae in his neck, and that's what kind of put him out of the job. So he retired in like 2020, and we continued. We actually met another almost 25 to 30 times after that, and we went through it once it was written. We went through it word for word. So the point we wanted to make was getting across. It wasn't huge changes, but we did get the change of the 1 3/4. Now an officer can do that. And if you can defend it, that's the thing with anything. You defend what you can and you own what you can't. And so we put that change, because when I was in Harlem, we did a lot of those stores. And this guy Mom's Killian, he told you, he goes, the only time you take that 2.5 off the rig is if I tell you to. If you walked up to a store on the first floor of a tenement with a 2.5, you'd never get the nozzle again. So I think that got bastardized because it isn't a commercial building. It's just a commercial occupancy, and the argument we put forward was, so if that same space was full of mattresses, couches, and plastics, I could take the 1 3/4. Because it's a store and it's full of potato chips and Coca-Cola, I have to take a 2.5, and that's how we kind of pushed it. And so we won that battle. We lost some of the friction losses we lost. We tried to change them, and we tested and tested. I had 88 day after day testing friction losses. And I, even what the manufacturer was giving me, we couldn't duplicate. So they wouldn't let us change the friction losses. But all in all, I mean, some guys had said that there was some things that are still wrong with it, that the ladder pipe evolution is in the engine manual. And a lot of guys believe that that is a truck evolution. One of the things I said when we moved it, I go, there's no reason it can't be in both, because it is an engine and a truck evolution. They ain't doing it on their own. There's no way, unless, you're not taking that thing, you pump out the hydrants with it and supplying a ladder pipe. So a guy said, yeah, that was the worst thing. You took this out of here. And I said, I get it, but we're trying to condense it down. And I think at the end, the document was okay. I think it came out okay. We put a lot of time into it, and we fought a lot about it. We fought about a lot of stuff, but a lot of people don't realize that once we rewrite it, it doesn't mean it's done. It goes to the unions. The unions have to approve it, which I was like, what? Staff has to approve it. And the third one is legal. They all have to approve that document. So, staff didn't approve the friction losses. That was one of the things I know for sure. There's probably some other things that they didn't improve. But, I was very happy that I was able to do that. Like I said, there was some really, Frank Lieb said it was murderer's row of engine company guys. And, not me. I don't think I'm that guy, but there were some super guys that really, really, really knew what they were talking about, Mark from 255. I mean, like that guy, he wrote the whole thing about the poor pressure governor and stuff. And I thought I knew a lot about engine work, and he blew my mind a couple of days by some of the things he put out there. So he's fantastic. He was in my probie class though, actually. But there was some really, really super dudes, and they all should be proud of that document, because we put a lot of time. We wanted to make sure it was right. I mean, looking at it word for word, must, should, shall, when, this, that, how we wanted, because we wanted some ambiguity so the officers could make decisions. We wanted officers to make decisions based on the document. We didn't want robots, and that's what makes the FDNY's officers corps as good as they are, because they're taught to make decisions. They're taught to look at the situation, and now hopefully a little bit more than before, they're allowed to deviate based on the ongoing, I'm here on the fire floor. I shouldn't have to call down and ask, if I can make a left in the hallway to get the room. You know what I mean? It's a little more exaggerated, but that's what we're talking about, that the officers on this job, have the ability to change on the fly, to see a developing situation and make that decision that'll affect the outcome for the better on the fly. Even though it might deviate from our standard things, you can still defend it. So, and that's what our officers do. And we wanted to write a document that kind of mirrored that mindset. That, having those officers, quality officers, that they'll say, no, we're not doing this. We're going this way. Oh, this way it says, no, we're going this way. And that's what we wanted to write, that document that allowed those free thinkers, those thinkers out of the box, to be able to do that and be able to defend them.
And I think they can. One more question before I get to the rapid fire. So 2021 is when you called it a day with the FDNY. Now you're still going as an instructor, but 31 years with the fire department in New York alone, not even counting your experiences in Connecticut. When did you start to think, what, maybe I should retire?
Well, so, it happens to all of us. We can fight it as long as we want. But the inevitability is that this great ride that is better than any ride that anybody could ever have is going to come to an end. That's just fact, So when I started realizing that I might, because I always was going to age out, there was going to be no reason for me to go. I'm still healthy. I can still get around. I still teach hands-on, live fire all the time. So I can still do it. But there was a guy who I looked up to a lot. He was a senior man in 38 truck. Vinny Albanese. He did, and his goal was to do 38 years in 38 truck. And he did. And he worked through, we got on in 69 or 68. And he worked in 38 truck the whole period through and they were, if you look at those runs and workers through the whole war year period, he was there. He had seen it, he had done it, and he did 38 years, 38 truck. He made his goal. He retired, and 2 years later, we put him in the ground. And I don't want to be that guy. There's got to be life after the fire department. And I took a serious look at it. I wrote all my concerns down when I finally came to that decision that, all right, I'm healthy, healthy enough that I can still travel. One of the things I thought about was like, I'm healthy now. So for every healthy day I continue to work, I'm losing 2 unhealthy days in the back end where I can't travel and do the stuff I want, when I retire. So I wrote all my concerns down, like missing it. That's the one that everybody, I miss it. And you're going to miss it. I miss it terribly. I'm going to lie. I'm not going to lie to you. I miss it. I'm struggling with it, to be honest with you. I'm struggling. I miss being in the front seat. I miss the bros. I miss being that guy that the chief turns around and says, hey, Timmy, can you do this? I miss every part about it. But at the end of the day, I looked at it seriously. And here's the thing is, time is never going to change that. If I aged out, I'm going to miss it. And I'm going to struggle with it at 65. If I stayed 2 more years, I would have struggled with it then. So time is never going to change. For us that love that job the way we do, the people you have on your podcast and everybody else, all those guys that are in it for everything, no matter how long you do, when you leave, you're going to miss it. There's no way around that. So it can't be a deciding factor. It can't be. Because then you'll just stay and you retire at 65. And the next thing you know, you're in a wheelchair and you can't do anything. So once I took that off, and here's a funny one. I looked at my wife and I thought about her and I said, and everybody will tell you that's on this job for a long time and loves it the way I do. I smile every time I think about it, is that they never thought about the wife. Now, what does the wife get out of the job? All the bad, none of the fun, none of the, they don't get the fire. They don't get the firehouse. They don't get all the antics, all the laughs. They get weekends alone, holidays alone, taking the kids to the ball games alone. Can't go on vacation when you want to because you can't. 9/11 alone, line of duties alone. All the bad this job offers, we get all the fun. We get the bad. We get some of the bad, but like on Christmas Eve when I'm in the firehouse, I'm having a ball. I'm not going to lie to you. And she's home alone with the kids on Christmas Eve. So you know what? She wants to travel. That was a big part of it. So long story short, I looked at everything. I made my decision. I got asked by the guys in 88. And one of the things that made me feel real good, they did not want me to retire. They made a parody video for me the night I retired from The Wolf of Wall Street. You see the movie?
Yeah, of course.
So they put my face on Leonardo DiCaprio. And I get the microphone. You know what the scene is?
Yeah,
and he goes,
I'm not leaving.
I'm not leaving. And then they scan the crowd.
Yeah.
And it's all faces of guys in 88. And then I go, I'm not leaving. And they'll go like this. And then I swear, I go, I'm not effing leaving. And they're all, it's hysterical to see. And like they said, and they were bets, you're not going to go. I said, listen, I'm leaving. I'm going to go. It's time. And I retired. And I said, screw it. I moved to South Carolina because the wife wanted to come. And the only thing I didn't think about was this dog I have. It's like having a 2-year-old. You can't go anywhere. So I haven't been able to travel yet. Well, she has, and I travel tons teaching. I had last year I had 70 flights. This year I'm at 55 already.
Jeez.
So
she wants to go.
Well, I just went to Fort Lauderdale. She could have come to Fort Lauderdale on them. I have a hotel room. I just got to get her there.
Oh.
I'm going to Chicago in 2 weeks. So, but we have this dog that just won't die. Sorry to say that. It's 15 years old.
Well, yeah.
You know what? It was a great run. The fire service, and what I'll tell you is, and it's kind of like, I owe a debt to the fire service that I will never, ever, ever be able to repay. It's given me everything. It's my identity. It really is. And there's no other job that anyone can say that about. But the fire service, I owe everything. And I'll get into it because you got that thing. You sent me that.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, you've been able to continue at least trying to pay that debt back all over the place, like you said, Chicago, Fort Lauderdale, here on the East Coast, on the West Coast.
And when I travel, I'm telling you, I do it for peanuts. I really do. I don't, most times I break even. And guys tell me I'm stupid for that. I go, you know what? I come home with a couple of shekels. I had a good time. I made a new friend, and somebody's better off.
Yeah, that's all you need.
That's it.
That's all you need. No, it's been a heck of a ride for you.
It's been a great ride.
Yeah.
It's been a great ride.
And now it's just in a new chapter. You're on a different road, but it's still the same ride.
Pretty boring chapter.
Oh, don't say that. Well, now it is time for the rapid fire. It's 5 hit and run questions for me and 5 hit and run answers from you. I know you're ready. I don't even think I have to ask you, so I'll jump right into it. And first, funniest call you ever responded to?
You know, it's hard to pick one. You know, it really is, because, you know, like, and some are funny, but you can't really say anything. And, you know, but one of the funniest calls was you know, like, I was still a fireman, and I was in Harlem at the time, and we were up in the Heights at a vacant building, and the boss tells me, "Hey, stay here. There's a hole in the floor. Don't let anybody fall in that hole in the floor." So I'm letting everybody go, you know, "Hey, watch out for the hole, watch out for the hole, watch out for the hole." And the back of the nozzle man gets burned, and Killian says, "Hey, Timmy, you got to come up here." So I stand up, and what do? I walk right into the hole in the floor. I just told everybody else not to go into. Now I'm up to my chin, and everybody looks at me and go, "Hey, Tim, watch out for the hole in the floor." Yeah. So widen your perspectives, bros. Widen your perspective.
Murphy's Law catching up to you in that moment. Second, most uplifting call you ever responded to?
Not a great call, but pretty uplifting. I was in 88. Eric Davidson, Mike Davidson's brother. Eric, I worked with his dad in 69 and 28, and he actually called me and wanted to know if I would take Eric in 88. And I'm like, absolutely. So Eric came to 88, and his brother Mike went to 69. We all know what happened to Michael. But we had to run one night for an imminent birth, and we got up there, and she had already given birth, but it's a preemie, you know, tiny, and she's just standing with the umbilical cord hanging out, and this preemie laying on the floor, and Eric just, you know, instinctively picked the kid up and started one fingering, and sure enough, the kid ended up living.
Wow.
Kid ended up living. Yeah.
Nice.
And, you know, that somebody told me the next day I should have called the press, and I wasn't that guy. I wasn't a press guy at all. But when I told some of that story, they're like, "You didn't call the press." I'm like, "Man, we were doing our job," you know. But Eric, right up to, you know, and started giving that kid, and that kid ended up living.
Nice.
Which was,
awesome.
Yeah, that kid ended up
uplifting. That's a very uplifting story. Well, it kind of answers the third question, which is a running joke between myself and Joe Maliga in the chat, which is, even though the woman had already given birth, you know, you were there for that call and you helped the baby out. So I don't have to ask you a third question, but I'll ask you.
You can, because I've had 3 others.
Oh, well, there you go. Then I will.
When I was in Harlem, but let's qualify that. You know, when I saw that question, let's qualify it, because I don't care. There isn't a fireman on this job that delivered a kid. There isn't one. I caught 3 of them. Okay. They were coming whether I was there or not. I was just a stupid guy that was there getting ready to catch them. So all I did was catch the damn thing. That's it. And they're slippery buggers too. You ever deliver one? They're slippery like you know, so I didn't deliver the kid. I just caught it. So if anybody ever asks, "You ever deliver a kid?" Well, I caught 3, you know.
Fly ball center field.
Yeah. You just don't spike it. You know, they say.
You don't want to do that. Touchdown. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City. You don't have to say one. You can say multiple if you want.
Well, Rathbones was, I love Rathbones was our place, 88 and 38. And actually 69 and 28's place. Unfortunately, it was a victim to COVID. Had been there 50 years and kind of died out. Turtle Bay was a good place. I like Rory Dolan's up in Yonkers, right over the city line. And the restaurant, it's got to be right down the street from 88 and that Little Italy in the Bronx, Antonio's. We have our officers' meetings there, our officers' dinners down there. It's a group. Me and my wife go there all the time. Real good place. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
And fifth and finally, I'm going to tweak this question a little bit. So, of course, it's usually what advice would you give anyone coming on the job now? But let's say you could go back in time and give advice to a younger version of yourself. What would Tim Klett of 2023 tell the Tim Klett, that got sworn in as a cadet in 1978, or the Tim Klett getting onto the FDNY in 1990?
That's pretty good. I was set for the other one. You know, it's hard because I was driven. You know, I was so driven to attain my goals. But I never lost sight of where I came from. You know, like I have a friend that's still up there and he says, you know, I'm the same jerk that I was when I was up there. I never let the fact that I went to a big city change the way I was, make me think I'm better than those guys. So it's hard. What would I tell me? I mean, like I had a question is, you know, after retiring, what would I have done more? And, I was the guy that drilled all the time. That was my non-negotiable. And I probably would have drilled more. I probably would have got more technical side of the job. Ropes was never my thing. So, and there's a whole community out there that revolve around ropes and collapse. I mean, there's so many subcultures within the culture of the fire department that you can get in, and that's what makes those guys in the rescue so good, because they have a piece of the pie from all those subcultures. Scuba, high angle, all these things where I was very limited. I loved it. Don't get me wrong. I loved what I did. I loved being an engine officer, and hopefully I was good at it. That stupid joke running around in the Bronx that everyone used to call me the Mago de Agua, the Wizard of Water. And I didn't make that up. That started in the Bronx. But I probably would have expanded a little bit more into some of those subcultures and been a little bit, to give an example, working in a ladder company, I was always uneasy working in the truck. And it wasn't because of fires. Fire's the easiest part of my day. I went to plenty of fires in the truck. It's challenging, but it's fun too. And you can. So I was never worried about that. What bothered me working in the truck?
What?
Elevators. Well, because I didn't know them.
Right.
Because I just didn't know them, and I just didn't want to be that guy that got a blind shaft elevator that I didn't know what to do. And then I got to call help. Listen, we really don't know what we're doing here. I mean, what does that make you? Not only you, but then especially covering officer, what have I done to that company?
Right.
So I should have, if I had to change anything, I probably would have expanded a little bit more and got a little piece of this and a little piece of that and a little piece of that. And I kind of individualized my direction a little bit, where I stayed the course of being an engine officer, a water guy. Like if it comes to water, listen, I'm your guy. I hate that. Like standpipes. I mean, I read NFPA 14. But it's what I did. But I never expanded out beyond that. And truck work, force and doors. Anybody can do that. But some of those other things, the high angles and the ropes. And, even extrication, I could do extrication, but I wasn't the guy to look for if you had a serious extrication. You know what I mean? So if I'm going to give advice, there's so many other disciplines within the fire service that interlace with each one. And if you're a young, dedicated firefighter that wants to move on, I think that, expand your horizon, expand those disciplines that you're proficient with. There's nothing wrong to be the expert on one subject. Nothing wrong with that, but at least know enough about those other ones where you can be proficient enough to make yourself and the company look good. And I don't think that I did that as well. I probably should have. Fortunately, I was never placed into a position that I didn't have an answer for or a remedy for. But without having those disciplines, I lined myself up for failure, I guess is the right term. So, and the other thing is just never think this job owes you anything, right? If you leave this job thinking that like you're bigger than the job, then I don't have any use for you. Like I owe the debt to the fire service. Like I said already, I'm never going to repay. And just be humble. Stay humble about the job. The job is the best thing. It'll give you everything. You just got to put whatever you put into this job, you're going to get out tenfold. I guarantee it. If you don't believe me, you don't belong in this job. If you put in 10%, you're getting 100% back. So put 100% in, and the job will give you 1,000%. And that's and I've lived it because I wanted to be a fireman in New York City since I was a kid. And now it's 31 years later, or even more than that. And I wish I could do it all over again. And I dare any retired guy that loved the job the way I did. I mean, I think about it and I just smile to say that they wouldn't, it's like asking for one more kiss. If you do that, if you get one more, you're going to want another one. So if you're asking for one more fire, if you get the one fire, guess what? You're going to want another one. And if you get another one, guess what? You're going to want another one. So it's great. I could ramble on. I apologize. I'm rambling.
No, I love it. Yeah, I love the honesty. And it's so true because there's not many jobs you can say that where guys are begging to go to work and when they leave, they can't wait to go back. Guys that put in 40 years, 30, 40 years, crying on the last day of the job, because that's how much they're going to miss
It's
it.
something special. And, if I could bottle it, I would, but I can't. There's just something special about the community itself of firefighters, not just New York City firefighters. Wherever you go, I could pick them out of a crowd. That guy's a fireman. That guy's a fireman. They're grown men with 12-year-old brains.
Right.
That's what they are. They have fun. They love to have fun, right?
Mm.
But they're always there for you if you need them. It's something special. It really is something special. It really, really is. I don't know what it is in particular, but it's a very special club to be in. Really is.
Of course. I think that's a good way to end. Stick around. We'll say goodbyes off the air. This was fantastic. Before I say goodbye to my lovely audience, is there any shout outs to anyone or anything that you would like to give?
Me?
Yes.
Shout outs. Well, my son's working in Baltimore, 14 engine tonight. Right now, probably one of the busiest engines on the East Coast. My other son, he'll be working tomorrow morning at 33 engine. And if they're not the busiest engine, then they're the second busiest engine on the. So to those two guys who understand what I'm talking about, they, I always joke with them. I says, you're playing for a major league ball club right now, Baltimore. I said, it just ain't the Yankees, but you're playing them. And, God bless those two. I love them to death and proud of them, more than anything else. And I doubt John Newell's listening, but, he's my bro, man. He's the guy. So.
There you go. Shout out to them and to John Newell as well. And as always, shout out to everybody in the audience that tuned in tonight. I very much appreciate it. Another FDNY interview is coming up next on the Mike New Haven podcast. And this gentleman, I'm going to confirm it with him, but I think in all likelihood we are on 38 years in total, finished up as a chief of department. Pete Hayden will be here this Friday at 7 p.m. So that should be a fun interview. And next Tuesday at 7 p.m., she was the second female counter sniper in the NYPD's emergency service unit in the history of the unit, going back to her formation in 1930. First Hispanic female counter sniper, as she told me. Tina Guerrero will be here. She did 25 years in the NYPD, 20 of them from 1998 until 2018 when she retired in ESU. Interesting woman, and I can't wait to hear her story next Tuesday for another volume of the E-Cops inside the NYPD's emergency service unit. In the meantime, on behalf of retired FDNY Lieutenant Tim Klett, I'm Mike Colón, and we will see you next time. Take care, everyone. See you Friday.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.